Hello everyone, and welcome back to Haunting Whispers. I'm aware that many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be a fun idea if each of you could leave a comment letting me know which part of the world you're listening from. Also, give a like and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the episodes. Okay, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. I participated in a social experiment with 5 boys and 5 girls. All of the boys died. Please help me. I'm stuck in my room, months after surviving the most traumatic experience of my life, and according to my doctor, I'm developing agoraphobia. But I don't think he or my family understand that I'm in literal fucking danger. I haven't slept in, 3 days? I can't eat, and I've locked myself in here for my own safety, as well as my father's and brother's. I have no clue what to tell them. Fuck. I don't even know where to start. I try to explain, but the words get tangled in my throat, like I'm choking on a tongue twister. And I won't tell you why my hands are slick with blood, sticky, wet, and fucking vile. I can still feel it, like there's something lodged deep inside me. So deep, not even my dad's penknife can reach it. I've spent most of the week hunched over the bathroom sink, watching dried blood swirl down the drain like tea leaves. I've carved into my ear so many times the sting of the blade doesn't even register anymore. But you have to understand, if I don't get this thing out of me, they'll find me again, and this time, I'm not sure I'll survive. First, let me make this clear. This isn't some attention-seeking bullshit. I know what I went through seriously fucked with my head. But like I keep telling everyone, I know they're not done with us. My doctor thinks I'm crazy, and my dad is considering sending me to a psych ward. Mom is different. She's been on the other side of my bedroom door all day, guarding me, protecting me from them. Dad says it's PTSD, and maybe that's part of it. But I'm also being hunted. Maybe a psych ward is what's best for me, but they'll find me, just like they've undoubtedly found the other 4. I've never felt so helpless, so hopeless, so alone. Dad is convinced just because Grammy had schizophrenia, I must have it too. Mom told him to leave. Like I said, for his own safety. This is me screaming into the void because I have nobody else to talk to. I'm 17 years old, and back in July, my mom forced me to join a social experiment, which was basically non-televised Big Brother, but for Gen Z. I wasn't interested. Last year's summer camp had already been a disaster. A kid caught some virus. He didn't die, but he got really sick, and they said it had something to do with the lake. Luckily, I didn't swim in it. Camp was canceled, and for months afterward, I had to go in for bi-weekly checks to make sure I wasn't infected. I thought this summer would be less of a mess, but then Mom gave me an ultimatum. Either I join a summer camp or extracurricular like my brother, or she'd send me to live with Dad. For reasons I won't explain, yes, I'd rather risk contracting a disease than spend the summer with Dad. His idea of a vacation is dragging my brother and me to his office. Now that Travis and I are old enough to make our own decisions, we avoid him like the plague. The divorce just made it easier. Mom never stops. She either works, runs errands, or creates new jobs so she can stay busy. When we were younger, she was diagnosed with depression. A lot of my childhood was spent sitting on her bed, begging her to get up, or being stuck in Dad's office, playing games on his laptop. Now, Mom makes up for all that lost time by being insufferable. She thought she was helping, but in reality, I was being smothered. When I wasn't interested in participating in her summer plans, my mother already had a rebuttal. Looming over me, blonde wisps of hair falling in overshadowed eyes, and wrapped up like a marshmallow, Mom resembled my personal angel of death. Just read it, she sighed, refilling my juice. The flyer looked semi-professional. If you ignored the Comic Sans, it was black and white with a simple triangle in the center. I'll admit, I was kind of intrigued. 10 teenagers, 5 boys and 5 girls, all living together in a mansion on the edge of town. It sounded like a recipe for disaster. 2 days later, we got the call. I was in. The terms raised brows. I wasn't allowed to use my real name. Instead, I had to pick from a list of traditionally feminine names. Whatever that meant. Marie, Amelia, Rosa. Mom doesn't understand the meaning of no, so I found myself stuck in the passenger seat of her fancy car as she drove me to the preliminary testing center. The tests were supposed to assess our mental and physical health to make sure we were fit for the experiment. The building loomed ahead. A cold, sterile structure of mirrored glass. No welcome signs, no color, just a desolate parking lot and checkerboard windows reflecting the afternoon sun. Yeps, exactly how I wanted to spend my summer. Being probed inside a dystopian hellhole. Seeing the testing center was the moment my feeble reluctance, but going along with it anyway, because why not, turned into full-blown panic once I caught sight of those soulless, symmetrical windows staring down at me. With my gut twisting and turning, I begged Mom to let me go to the disease-ridden summer camp instead. Or better yet, let me stay inside. There was nothing wrong with rotting in bed all day. "I'm not going," I said, refusing to shift from my seat. Mom sighed impatiently, glancing at her phone. My consultation was at 1:30, and it was 1:29. "Tessa," Mom said with a sigh, "I'm not supposed to tell you this. It's against the rules, but..." She rolled her eyes. "Call it quid pro quo if you want." I knew what was coming. The same threat every summer. "If you don't do what I say, you can go live with your father." I avoided making eye contact with her. "I'm not living with Dad." Mom cleared her throat. "This isn't just a social experiment, Tessa. It's a test of endurance. The team that stays in the house the longest wins a prize." She paused, playing with her fingers in her lap. $1 million. I nearly fell out of my seat. $1 million? I choked out. "Are you serious?" "Parents aren't supposed to tell the participants." Mom shushed me like they could hear us. "It's to avoid coercion. The experiment is supposed to be natural participation and a genuine intention to take part." Mom's lip twitched. "But I know you wouldn't participate unless there was money involved." Mom sighed. "Is this the wrong time to say you remind me of your father?" She was sneaking panicked looks at me, but I was already thinking about how $1 million would get me through college without a dime from Dad, who was using my college fund to drag me on vacations. I snapped out of it when Mom not so gently nudged me with a chuckle. "Between the 5 of you," she reminded me. "But still, it's a lot of money, Amelia." Amelia. So, she was already calling me by my subject name. Totally normal. Before I knew it, I was sitting in a clinically white room with several other kids. No windows, just a single sliding glass door. There were 3 rows of plastic chairs, with 4 occupied. 2 girls on my left, 2 boys on my right, all bathed in painfully bright lights. I could only see their torsos. A guard collected my phone. A towering woman resembling Miss Trunchbull, right down to the too tight knotted hair and military uniform. I barely made it 3 strides before she was stuffing a white box under my nose. 4 iPhones already inside. I dropped my phone in, only for her to pull it back and thrust it back in my face. "Turn it off," she spat. I obeyed, my hands growing clammy. I was referred to as Amelia and told to sit in my assigned seat. I could barely see the other participants, that painful light bleeding around their faces, obstructing their identities. It took me a while to realize it was intentional. These people really did not want us to see or speak to each other. I did manage, through a lot of painful squinting, to make out one boy had shaggy, sandy hair, while the other, a redhead, wore Ray-Bans. The girls were a ponytail brunette and a wispy blonde. Time passed, and the guards blocking the doorway made me uneasy. The blonde girl kept shifting in her seat, asking to use the bathroom. I just saw her as a confusing golden blur. When they told her no, she kept standing up and making her way over to the door before being escorted back. The red-headed boy was counting ceiling tiles. Through that intense light bathing him, I could see his head was tipped back. I could hear him muttering numbers to himself and immediately losing his place. When he reached 4,987, he groaned, slumping in his seat. When my gaze lingered on the blonde for too long, the guard snapped at me. "Amelia, that's your first warning." The kids around me chuckled, which pissed her off even more. "If you break the rules again, you'll be asked to leave." Her voice dropped into a growl when the boys' chuckles turned into full-blown giggles. I tried to hold in my own laughter, but something about being trapped with no phones or parents and forced into a room with literally nothing to entertain us turned us all into kindergartners again, which was refreshing. I think at some point I turned to smile at the blonde, only to be fucking blinded by that almost angelic light. I noticed the guard's knuckles whitened around her iPad. Her patience was thinning with every spluttered giggle, and honestly, that only made it harder not to laugh. Heads down, she ordered. The spluttered laughing was starting to get to her. I don't know what it was about her authoritative tone, but we obeyed almost instantly, ducking our heads like falling dominoes. In 3 strides, she loomed over us, the stink of hair gel and shoe polish creeping into my nose and throat. I didn't dare look up, but when one of the boys coughed, I knew I wasn't the only one overwhelmed by the smell. This woman's simple knotted ponytail was not worth that much hair gel. She paced up and down our little line, and I watched her boots thud, thud across the floor. When she stopped in front of me, the smell grew toxic, my eyes smarting, and my eyes started to water. If you make any more noise, you will be asked to leave. With $1 million hanging over my head, I didn't. Luckily, after hanging my head for what felt like 2 hours, my name was finally called. The afternoon was a literal blur. I was welcomed into a small room and told to perch on a bed with a plastic coating, the kind they have in emergency rooms. I went through my usual checkup. They measured my height and weight and drew some blood. According to the man prodding and poking me, my physical health was perfect. During the mental health tests, I answered a series of questions about my well-being, confidence, social life, relationships, and overall attitude toward life. I studied the guy's expression as he ran through the questions, and I swear he didn't even blink. He looked about my dad's age, maybe a little younger, with a receding hairline. He wore casual jeans and a shirt under a white coat. "All right, Amelia, your preliminary tests are looking promising so far," he said, standing and offering me a kind, if slightly suspicious, smile. It looked almost mocking. "You're probably not going to like this part, but I can assure you this is simply to protect subject confidentiality." He nodded reassuringly. I tried to smile back, but I was definitely grimacing. He turned his back and rummaged through a drawer, pulling out a scary-looking shot. I hated needles. My gaze was already glued to the door, calculating how to dive off the bed without looking childish. I jumped when a screech echoed from outside, reverberating down the hallway. It was one of the guys. Before I could move, the doctor was in front of me, his warm breath in my face. "Open wide, Amelia." I did, opening my mouth as wide as I could. He chuckled. "Your eyes, Amelia. Open your eyes as wide as you can and try not to blink, all right?" Another cry echoed, louder this time. The same boy. Thundering footsteps pounded down the hallway. "No, let me go! Get the fuck off me!" "I don't want to." I found my voice, though it came out as a whimper. "Is he?" "We're having slight trouble with one particular subject," the doctor murmured, his gloved fingers forcing my left eye open. "He is afraid of needles." His tone was gentle, and the knot in my stomach loosened. I barely felt the shot as I focused on counting the ceiling tiles. He pricked both of my eyes, and when it was over, he told me to blink 5 times and open them again. "It's not permanent," he said, though his voice sounded strange. It wasn't just my vision. It was messing with voices too. It should wear off by the time you get home. He helped me stand. "If you're still experiencing blurred vision after 6 p.m., don't hesitate to contact us." Blurred vision? At first, I didn't understand what he was talking about, until my gaze found his face, which was shrouded in an eerie white fog. I couldn't blink it away. It wasn't that I couldn't see. It was as if my ability to recognize faces had been severed, like someone had driven a pipe through my brain. After temporarily blinding me, they released me from the room. I was maybe 4 steps from the threshold when I nearly tripped over someone. No, it was more like I almost fell over them. I couldn't see faces, but I saw what looked like the shadow of a guy sitting on the floor, arms wrapped around his knees. He was wearing a hospital gown that hung off his thin frame, and his bare legs were bruised, as if he'd had too many shots. Strange. I hadn't been asked to change clothes. This kid was trembling, rocking back and forth, heavy breaths rattling his chest. I guess the tests were different for guys, probably more intense than just some mental health questions and shots in both eyes. Blinking rapidly, I tried to see through the fog, but he had no identity, just a confusing blur on the edges of my vision. He looked human, but the harder I tried to focus, the more uncanny he seemed, like a silhouette bleeding into a shadow that was almost human, and yet there was something wrong. From his sudden, sharp breath, I knew he saw the same thing. I was the ghost hovering in front of him. Not wanting to break the rules, I sidestepped him, nearly tripping over my own feet. The drugs in my eyes, or whatever the fuck they were fucking with me. Did they really have to blind us to prevent us from communicating? Surely that had to be illegal. Tessa? The voice was drowned of emotion, of humanity, masking any real emotion. But I could still hear his agony, his desperation, and his joy. When bony fingers wrapped around my arm, nails digging into my skin, I froze, not just from the touch, but from his agonizing wail that followed. He was crying. But it didn't sound human, like a robot was mimicking the tears of a human being. "It is you," he whispered, his voice splintering in my mind. How did this stranger know my real name? Something ice-cold crept down my spine. Could he see me? I stepped back, his fingers slipped from my arm one by one. He swayed, and so did his foggy, incoherent face. His torso was easier to make out. The boy was skinny, almost unhealthily so, his clothes hanging off him. "Don't move," he whispered. "They're watching us." I was aware I was backing away before he was suddenly in my face, his breath cold against my skin. Too cold. "You need to listen to me, because I'm only going to say this once." I noticed what was sticking from his wrist, a broken tube still stuck into his skin. He'd torn out his IV. What did this kid need an IV for? "Shh," he whispered. "I didn't say anything," I replied. He laughed, which was a strange, choking sound through a robotic filter. "You sound like a Dalek," he giggled, barely holding himself together. Then, without warning, he grasped my arm tighter, drawing a small screech from my throat. "They keep calling me. What's the word again?" His laughter turned hysterical, nearly toppling him over. It was drowned out by more screeches, probably from the drugs masking his real laugh. He leaned closer, forcing me against the wall, breath hissing in quick bursts. "You know?" he laughed. His blurry form swayed to the left, then the right, sweat-soaked curls sticking to his forehead. "Grrr," he growled, breaking into another giggle. "That's what they keep calling me." The boy who knew my real name didn't stop to talk. Instead, he flicked my nose before catapulting into a run in the opposite direction. The doors flew open, and a group of guards charged after him. After that weird encounter, I somehow found my way back to my mother, who was also a blurry face. She hugged me and asked how it went. I told her I didn't want to continue, and of course she was like, "Well, you haven't even given it a real try, Tessa. It might surprise you." I was too disoriented to tell her I was partially blind. Thankfully, the blur wore off after an hour, as soon as we left the testing center. Mom was reluctant to pull me from the program until I told her they stabbed me in the eye and temporarily blinded me. I had to beg her to not go back and murder that doctor. Mom was ready to be insufferable again, but this time I actually wanted her to act like a mama bear. But once a contract is signed, not even a parent can break it, so it was either I participated in the experiment or my mother would be sued. That's how I found myself standing in front of a towering mansion under a dark sky. The place was beautiful, but had a macabre Addams Family vibe. I'm not sure how to describe it because my clumsy words won't do it justice. It was a mix of modern and ancient, crumbling brick walls paired with sliding glass doors. A towering statue of Athena loomed over the fountain in front of me. I snapped a quick photo with my phone, captioning it, "Prison," for my 100 Instagram followers, before another female guard promptly confiscated it. All of the guards were female, I noticed. No men? I was only allowed one suitcase for clothes and essentials, so I dragged along a single carry-on. The organizers were a brother-sister duo of young scientists named Elizabeth and Nathaniel. They looked and acted like twins, finishing each other's sentences and mimicking expressions, which was unsettling. Elizabeth was the outspoken one, and she refused to call me by my real name outside the experiment. She was stern-looking, with dark hair tied into a ponytail so tight it probably gave her headaches. Nathaniel was quieter, not really a talker. His smile never quite reached his eyes. He looked disheveled, to say the least. His white shirt was wrinkled, thick brown curls hanging in half-lidded eyes. Nathaniel reminded me of a college kid, not a scientist. I greeted them with a forced grin, well aware that I was practically being coerced into this experiment to keep my mother out of legal trouble. Elizabeth kept asking, "Are you excited?" So I played along with, "Yes, I'm so excited to be stuck in a mansion with strangers for 3 months. When the others arrived, we were separated into two groups, boys and girls. I wasn't a fan of immediately being divided. I recognized a couple of the kids from the testing center, which were the redhead and ponytail brunette. The redhead was the first to arrive after me, and he looked completely different from the scrawny kid I remembered. Without that obstructing light, he had freckles and wide brown eyes that flickered to me once before avoiding me. He was definitely on his school's football team, broad-shouldered and boyishly handsome, but his eyes kept drifting to my chest. He didn't even greet me, instead shuffling over to the boys' line. I tried to start a conversation, mentioning the testing center, but he just snorted and turned away, fully turning his back to me. When the girls arrived, I was comforted. Abigail, the anxious blonde, who was definitely the girl from the testing center, greeted me with a hesitant hug, instantly making her my favorite person. Esme, the ponytail brunette, was quick to pull Abigail away from the boys' prying eyes. Esme was tiny, but had a big personality. The moment she stepped out of her Uber, she grinned at me and introduced herself as the future president of the United States. The last two girls were Rhea and Jane. Rhea was the influencer type, acting as if we should all recognize her on sight. Jane was exactly what her name suggested. Plain Jane. She wore a white-collared shirt, a simple skirt, and a matching headband. I didn't fully get to know the guys that first day, but I did catch their names. Freddie was the guy who would not stop talking about his dog. The only way I can describe him is to imagine Tom Holland's Spider-Man, only with a Long Island accent. He greeted me with a grin before somehow tripping over his own feet. Then there was Adam, a quiet, laid-back guy who definitely smuggled weed in his pack. His trench coat practically screamed pretentious film student. He wouldn't shut up about wanting to show us his collection of Serbian films. Jun, a Southeast Asian kid, was the joker of the group. His magic tricks were surprisingly good, leaving us all speechless. Finally, there was Ben, who stood apart from the group. His eyes narrowed. I figured I was being paranoid, but he was definitely assessing each of us. He watched Freddie jump around like a child, and Jun not so subtly flirting with Abigail. This guy was definitely a sociopath, I thought. He was calculating each of us. When his penetrating gaze found mine, I averted my eyes. Then there was Mr. Ignorant, Kai. He wasn't as bad as I initially thought, though. When we headed inside, he apologized. "Sorry about earlier," he said, fidgeting with his hands. "I don't know why I did that." After that little exchange, Kai became an unlikely friend. The rules were simple. Live in the house without adults for 3 months. The organizers explained that we would be monitored the entire time, and whichever group stayed inside the house the longest would win the $1 million prize. We were allowed 1 hour of outdoor time per day, with mental and physical health specialists on standby. Just like I thought, Ben, now knowing our personalities, took charge, gathering everyone in the foyer to assign sleeping arrangements. Girls upstairs, boys downstairs. The first month was surprisingly fun. All 10 of us got along, setting up house rules and a rota for cooking. With Freddie, an unlikely chef, we ate like royalty. There were friendships that blossomed, and not much flirting, which I expected. It felt more like a summer camp than a social experiment. The mansion was huge, with 10 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, and even an indoor pool where I spent most of my time. I had my own little circle: Abigail, Kai, and me. Abigail confessed that she was an orphan, and Kai admitted he struggled with body image issues and the pressure to be perfect for his parents. Those days with the 3 of us lounging by the pool were nice. Freddie joined us sometimes, diving into the pool and immediately ruining the conversation. Our little personal heaven started to spiral when we ran out of luxury items. I vaguely remembered being told when we ran out. It was everyone's fault. Ben kept sneaking snacks up to his room, and Freddie was stealing for him, because already, that fucking sociopath already had the poor kid wrapped around his little finger. Jun baked cakes that no one ate except him, with way too much frosting. Even Abigail and I held picnics by the pool with expensive cheese and chocolate, so we weren't innocent either. However, Freddie got the most blame, since he admittedly was a little too obsessed with making every night a celebration. Ben started yelling at him, but it was Ben who insisted on making a luxury 10-cheese pasta a week earlier. When the essentials became our only food, We tried to ration them. Jun helped Freddie portion meals, and Abigail and I started noting down every food item. I concluded that as long as stuck to our rations, we could live comfortably for the duration of the experiment. Then the boys threw a midnight party. They blew through nearly a week's worth of food in one night. I dragged a disheveled Kai out of Ben's room, which stunk of urine, and demanded to know why they'd done it. He just laughed, spit in my face, and shouted, "Who wants to mattress surf?" That was the start of the divide. Esme called a house meeting and proposed a truce with Ben, the boys' leader. We agreed to split the food equally, and Esme even drew a yellow line on the staircase, making the divide official. Boys were downstairs and girls were upstairs. I tried to talk to Kai, standing on opposite sides of the yellow line, but he just stared at me with a dead-eyed grin. He wasn't listening to me, bursting out into childish giggles when I tried to talk to him. It was like talking to a fucking toddler. When I shoved him, he snapped. "Uptight bitch." Kai's behavior became increasingly more erratic. He emptied the inside pool. How? I have no fucking idea, so I couldn't go for a swim. Then he declared it the boys' pool, and no girls were allowed. Freddie, who had turned into this cowardly freak, became the boys' messenger. He passed me a message from Kai asking me to meet him in the foyer at 3 a.m. I actually believed it until Esme calmly dragged me away, telling me there were 5 boys covered in war paint and armed with eggs. By the second month, everything fell apart. The boys ran out of food and started stealing ours. They became more akin to animals, aggressive and unpredictable, destroying everything in their path. They stopped showering and washing their clothes, moving in a pack formation. Freddie, who once seemed sweet, grew violent when Abigail refused to hang out with him. He screamed in her face before throwing food at her. Food that we needed. Adam and Ben ruled the boys' side of the house like kings, sending Freddie running around like a pathetic fucking messenger pigeon. He was so obsessed with being accepted by the boys. This kid had become their lapdog. When I tried to pull him to our side, he started shrieking like an animal, and to my confusion, June came and dragged him away, hissing at us and warning. Esme was too kind for her own good. She offered to give them a small selection of essential food items in exchange for them stopping destroying the house. They agreed, and we gave them 6 loaves of bread, a single pack of cookies, and an 8-pack of water. They used the water to soak us in our sleep, despite having access to tap water. I wasn't expecting Kai to pay me a visit the night after their hazing ritual. He pulled me from my bed, muffling my cries, and dragged me into the downstairs bathroom. I was ready to scream bloody murder, but then I saw the slow, trickling streak of red pooling down his temple. Kai held a finger to his lips, motioning for me to stay silent. He got close, far too close for comfort, backing me into the wall. His lips grazed my ear before he let out a spluttered sob. "There's something wrong with me," Kai whispered. "I keep blacking out, and what I do doesn't make sense. I keep trying to apologize to you, and I don't understand what's gotten into us, but He stepped back, dragging his nails down his face, stabbing them into his temple. "I can feel it," he said, his voice fracturing as he pressed harder against his temple, his lips curling into a maniacal grin. "There's something in my head, and it's right fucking there. I can't get it out of my head." Kai slammed his head into the mirror, but his expression stayed stoic. He didn't even blink. "I can't think," he whispered, tearing at his hair. "I can't fucking think straight, and I can't." I watched his eyes seem to dilate, the edges of his lips crying out for help, slowly curl into a smirk, his arms falling by his sides. When he shoved me against the wall, the breath was ripped from my lungs. He kissed me, but it was forceful, and it hurt, the weight of his body pinning me in place. Kai's eyes were wide, his gaze locked onto my body, drool spilling from his lips and trailing down his chin. I shoved him back with a shriek, and he stumbled, blinking rapidly. I don't know why I did that. The boy broke down, trying to stifle his own hysterical sobs. With an animalistic snarl, he punched the mirror, and it shattered on impact. His breaths were heavy, spluttering on sobs. "You need to get it out." Kai grabbed a shard of glass, stabbing it into his temple. "Please." His expression crumpled. "Get it out. If I can get it right here." He stabbed the shard into his ear, blood pooling out. "I'm so close, Amelia," he sobbed, clawing at his face. So close, so close, so close. When he stabbed the shard into his cheek and burst into hysterical giggles, I remembered how to run. I could still hear him, his cries echoing down the hallway. Get it out! Get it out! Get it out! That night, after no communication from the outside world, I made sure to lock the 5 of us girls in Abigail's room. I was terrified of Kai, and as the night went on, the boys began to thunder upstairs, Wolf whistling and laughing, pounding at our door. I wasn't sure when and how I'd managed to fall asleep, only to be woken around 4 a.m. by a screeching sound and Elizabeth's voice calmly telling us to keep our eyes shut and leave the premises. And no matter what happened, we could not open our eyes, but I didn't have to see. I could already feel it, something sticky pooling between my bare toes as we left our room. Elizabeth's voice led the 5 of us downstairs, and I'll never forget the sensation of slipping in something wet and squishy, that oozed and slicked the back of my bare soles. 24 hours later, we were informed that all 5 boys were dead, presumably killed by an animal that had gotten in. But that wasn't true. For 2 weeks, I stayed in the facility for more tests. Elizabeth and Nathaniel told us to be as honest as possible, but when the other girls started to speak up about that night, they were promptly removed from group therapy. Esme was the first. The girl who I looked up to broke into a hysterical fit, attacking 3 guards. The next time I saw her, she wore a dead-eyed smile. I did try to ask her about that night, only for her expression to go blank, her smile stretching wider and wider, almost inhuman. I didn't even realize she'd lunged at me until Esme was straddling me, her hands around my throat. Something wet hit my cheek. Drool. Esme was drooling. I stayed quiet and pretended to take medication I was prescribed for trauma, spitting them down the drain. I didn't tell the people in white prodding me that I lost myself, lost time, and for a dizzying moment, lost complete control. The people in white tell me I awoke at the sound of the alarm, but that wasn't true. I just remember rage that was agonizing, tearing through me like poison. I remember awakening to animal-like screeching. I was curled up inside a sterile white room, my knees to my chest, sitting on a plastic chair. I felt perfectly clean, and yet Kai's blood was dried under my fingernails, slick on my cheeks, and dripping from my lashes. He was all over me, staining me, painting my clothes to my flesh. His entrails were bunched in my fists, entwined between my scarlet fingers. Rage. What he had done to me played like a stuck record in my head. I was half aware of my fingers scratching at the plastic of the chair. I could hear the other girls screeching, ripping the boys apart, and the stink of flesh, the sweet aroma of blood thick in the air, made my mouth water. I was on the edge of my seat, spitting out fleshy pieces of Kai's brain stuck between my teeth. I think I'm going crazy. His voice startled me, and I lifted my head, finding myself staring into 3 monitors playing footage from inside the mansion. There he was on the screen, balancing on a chair in front of a camera. His voice was slurred, his eyes dilated. I think there's... Kai punched himself in the face until his nose exploded, until he was picking at tiny metal splinters stuck to his lips and chin. There's something in my head, he wailed. The footage switched, this time to the testing center. There I stood, paralyzed, blinking rapidly at the ghostly figure I couldn't see. And standing in front of me was a boy. Tessa. His smile was wide, dreamlike. He could see me. It is you. I felt something come apart in my head, unraveling, especially when I was painted head to toe in him. But the thought was burned away before it could fully form. The footage flickered to a smiling Elizabeth with her arms folded. "It's okay, Amelia," she said. "We all knew the girls were going to come out on top. From the moment we are born, women are made to be the hunters, while men, who of course mentally devolve with animal-like traits, are the hunted." She laughed, only for Nathaniel to grumble something behind her. Proving this to my stubborn brother was of course a chore, but now he knows. Elizabeth's eyes were manic. The future is female. Women will climb towards the top of the food chain, while men, our pathetic little boys, will regress to mindless beasts. I took in every word, squeezing entrails between my fists. "All right, Amelia, I want you to repeat what I say. All right? Then you can go finish your meal. I bet you're excited." She leaned forward. "I'm sure you're looking forward to stage 2 of the experiment. Now, what happens when the hunted fight back?" The woman clapped her hands together. Even better. Why don't we see what happens when the hunters are let out of their cage? Just get on with it, Nathaniel said from behind her. Stop fucking gloating, sis. I found myself mimicking Elizabeth's smile, my lips spreading wider. It was a bear that killed the boys, she said in a sing-song voice. I copied her, the words rolling off my tongue perfectly. It was a bear. When the sliding glass door opened, releasing me back into the house, Freddie stumbled past me. Like clockwork, the girls surrounded him in a pack. Abigail was the first to lunge, leaping onto his back with a feral snarl. Esme followed, and then Jane. I don't remember much past that moment, but I do remember Freddie's blood sticking to my skin, ingrained and entangled inside me. Elizabeth's voice in my head said it was good. Pieces keep coming back to me, drenched in red. I see each of the boys that were torn apart. I see their terrified faces, and I ask myself why my brain won't let me mourn them. Instead, when I think of what was left of Ben's head caught between Esme's teeth, I only think of an unfiltered, writhing pleasure that creeps up my spine and twists in my gut, bleeding inside my brain. Why did my brain like it? The day I was released from the testing facility, I forgot my bag. Mom told me to go back and get it, and I did, though not before peeking into the room on my left where I had been staying. Unlike my room, which had a bed and wardrobe, this one held a glass cage. Inside, a boy curled up like a cat, dressed in clinical white shorts and t-shirt. Something was stuck under his arm, just below his shirt sleeve. It looked like a needle, no doubt pumping him full of something. I took a single step over the threshold, a mistake. The instant I moved, he sensed me, diving to his feet and slamming himself headfirst into the glass. It took me a moment to fully drink this boy in. His eyes were inhuman, milky white filling his iris. There was no sparkle of awareness, all human features replaced with something feral, like I was looking at a rabid dog. When I found myself moving closer, something pulling me towards him, his lips curled back in a vicious snarl, sharp, elongated fangs ready to rip me apart. Strangely, I wasn't scared. Instead, my body took over. In 3 strides, I stood with my face pressed against the glass. Something was familiar about him, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. Like a version of me that was suppressed and pushed down, did remember him. The boy jumped back with a hiss, then leaned forward hesitantly to sniff the pain. Something inside me snapped, and I hissed back at him. His stink overwhelmed me, suddenly thick and raw. Threat. The feeling was foreign, and yet I couldn't say I hadn't felt it before. Before I could stop myself, my body was lunging into the glass, an animalistic screech tearing from my lips. I couldn't control it. Suddenly, hunger and thirst overwhelmed me. My gaze locked onto his throat, where I sensed a healthy pulse. The boy cocked his head slowly, studying me. He opened his mouth to speak, but his words were tangled and wrong, blended together. That snapped me out of it. He snapped his teeth one more time, as if warning me, before stepping back and resuming his position curled into a ball. When logic returned in violent splutters, whatever had taken over me faded. Hey! I tapped on the glass, and his head jerked, like an animal's ears twitching. He only offered me an annoyed snort, burying his head in his arms. I took notice of a name scrawled on the cage in permanent marker. Bear. I couldn't get him out of my mind. Kai said there was something inside his head, his erratic behavior which led to him becoming more animal-like. Was the caged boy the final stage? I wish I could tell you things got better when I got home, but on my first night back, I ate an entire pack of raw bacon. Then I attacked my father, nearly clawing his eyes out. I almost killed my brother. So now, I've locked myself in my room, for their safety and my own. 3 days ago, I was formally invited to participate in Stage 2. It will take place from October to December. The bastards covered the first stage up. According to my town, the boys don't even exist anymore. I suspect their families have been paid off, or something more nefarious. Whoever, or whatever, was in that cage at the testing facility is Stage 2. Mom said no, fucking obviously. Unlike Dad, she believes something is wrong with me. After examining me herself, she refuses to involve outsiders. Mom found a tiny incision behind my ear. She told me to leave it alone and promised to get me real help before whatever it is activated. But she's as scared as I am. She won't go to work. She just sits in front of my bedroom door, waiting. I've tried to copy Kai. Whatever they put inside his head, they put inside mine too. But no matter how many times I force the blade of Dad's penknife into the back of my ear, I can't find anything. Still, I know something is there. It's why I can smell Mom's scent so clearly. And no matter how hard I try to push the thought away, all I can think about is tearing out her throat. I know the other girls are waiting. I can already sense them crowding around the house, waiting for their kill. Mom is right behind the door with a baseball bat. We've been talking. I told her to kill me the second I stop responding to her voice. She's not going to let anything or anyone hurt me. But I'm terrified she's going to have to use her weapon on me, or one of my girls, because I don't think I'm her daughter anymore. I don't think I'm fucking human anymore. If you thought that was spine-chilling, just wait. The next story will send shivers down your spine. When I first saw the job listing, I thought it was a scam. Night attendant needed. Historic Arcadian hotel. Must be reliable, detail-oriented, and trustworthy. Pays $500 per shift. The rate sounded unreal, too good to be true, but too good to pass up, especially considering my dwindling bank account. The email response arrived less than a day after I applied. They attached a quick questionnaire, then sent a brief email confirming that I'd been hired and was expected to report that night. The day before my shift, an envelope arrived at my apartment. Inside, a small brass key, along with a second envelope containing a check for $500 and a handwritten note. Congratulations and welcome to the Arcadian family. Enclosed is your master key. You'll need this key to let yourself in and access certain parts of the hotel. Enter through the main doors by 10 p.m. Your first shift begins promptly at 11 p.m. Training will be available in the back room behind the front desk. Please watch all training materials before starting your shift. We appreciate your commitment to rebuilding the legacy of the Arcadian. Curious, and admittedly a little nervous, I made my way to the hotel that night. The Arcadian was just as I'd imagined. The exterior was a fading memory of elegance, worn stone walls with crumbling edges, tall windows with elegant exterior spotlights that no longer worked. I glanced at the clock on my phone. 9:45. I had time. The hotel's lobby was huge, dominated by a grand staircase. Dust layered every surface, and the faintest whiff of mildew hung in the air. I took a breath, suppressing a shiver, and walked toward the front desk. Behind it was a small door labeled Staff Only. This must be where they wanted me to watch the training. Inside the staff room, I found a TV set atop a rolling cart and a row of numbered VHS tapes stacked next to it. The first tape had a label on it in looping script, Arcadian Employee Training, 1952. Next to it was a sheet of paper with instructions. Watch all tapes in order, do not skip ahead. I slid the first tape into the VHS player and turned on the TV. The screen flickered, a hum crackling through the speakers, and then it jumped to life. A video came up, which looked in rough shape, like it was a copy of a copy. A cheerful man, in a sharp 1950s suit, stood in front of a pristine version of the lobby I'd just walked through. "Welcome to the Arcadian family," he began with a polished grin. "We are delighted to have you on board as a steward of one of New York's finest luxury establishments." His tone was light, upbeat, but he had a strange way of pausing, just momentarily between each sentence to smile. "Let's begin with a few simple rules to keep our guests safe and happy," he continued. "Remember, our guests may at times be unique, but they deserve the utmost courtesy and the finest of service. Now please follow these essential guidelines." The first few videos went over the basics, instructions on how to clean, address guests, check-ins and check-outs, when to check the guest log, and where to find supplies. But on the final video, things took for the strange. "Congratulations on making it to the end of your training. Attaboy! Now let's cover a few final essentials to keep our guests smiling and keep you right as rain. Listen close now. These pointers are real important. Rule number 1. If the elevator takes you to the basement, do not be alarmed. Simply close your eyes and stand still until it moves back up. No peeking. The man chuckled in a practiced, rehearsed way, as though he'd been told to laugh but wasn't sure why. My stomach twisted at his words. The basement? Why would the elevator just take me to the basement? Rule number 2. If you find a guest wandering the halls between 2 and 4 a.m., gently escort them back to their room. Under no circumstances should you allow them near the front doors. Use a firm hand if needed. If they seem upset, simply assure them that it will all be over soon. A chill ran through me. What kind of guest would be staying here, anyway? The hotel wasn't even open. I tried to shake off the unease. The man's smile remained fixed as he went on with the rules. Rule number 3. Do not look into the mirrors after midnight. Our mirrors sure are something else. We wouldn't want you to become disoriented. Rule number 4. Every night, count all the keys on the board. Make sure all your keys are accounted for. More importantly, there should always be 4 keys marked for the 10th floor. If one of those keys are missing, lock up the lobby doors, turn off the lights, and wait behind the front desk until dawn. Do not attempt to look for it. 10th floor? I thought. The hotel doesn't even have 10 floors. He proceeded with a few more rules. Rule number 5. Now listen closely, folks. If a gentleman with a yellow umbrella comes in asking, "Do you have a vacancy?" you must politely reply, "I'm sorry, we have no vacancy." No matter how upset he gets, stay calm and cheerful. That's the way to keep things running smoothly. Rule number 6. Attention, night owl. If you find that key 309 is missing at the start of your shift, here's what you do. Whip up a ham and cheese sandwich. Gather those supplies from the kitchen. Then head on over to room 309 and give a polite knock. Remember, don't make eye contact. Just hold out that plate and wait until you hear the door close before you step away. You've got it. Rule number 7. Now, let's talk about Ronald, our cleaning ace. He'll waltz in and say, "I'm here to clean the mess," to which you'll unlock the custodian closet and let Ronald take it away. If he doesn't give you that magic phrase, simply say, "No cleaning needed tonight, Ronald," and don't forget to lock the doors tight after he leaves. That's how we keep everything shipshape. Last but not least, rule number 8. Now listen up, friends. It's important you remember this. Never, and I mean never, enter the management office. If you happen to find the door slightly ajar, just keep on walking and mind your business. And if you hear any peculiar sounds coming from inside, don't let your curiosity get the better of you. Simply carry on with your tasks. We want to keep everything peachy keen around here. I thought. The next few minutes focused on specifics of the hotel layout, explaining what doors led where, how to reset the breaker, and the importance of logging any guest encounters in the shift report binder. The rules he'd given, though, stuck with me like a bad taste. That concludes our training. You're now ready to head on out there and knock it out of the park. Thank you again for your commitment to the Arcadian legacy. Finally, I switched off the TV. By then, it was a little after 11 p.m., so I made my way to the front desk to get a feel for my new workspace. The first part of the night was uneventful. The Arcadian was silent, except for a soft hum. I completed the tasks in the handbook they'd given me, accounting for all the keys, sweeping the lobby, wiping down the desk. It was eerie, but manageable. I settled in behind the front desk, scrolling through my phone and waiting for the night to pass by. At around 1:30 a.m., the front door of the hotel opened. An old man shuffled into the lobby. He wore a faded custodian uniform that looked like it had seen better days, and I could barely make out the name tag reading Ronald as he drew closer. He moved slowly, his feet dragging slightly on the worn carpet, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I knew I had to wait for him to say the phrase that would confirm he was here for his nightly duties. When he finally reached the desk, he looked up at me with weary eyes and said, "I'm here to clean the mess." A wave of relief washed over me as I realized he'd said it. I quickly unlocked the custodian closet, my hands trembling slightly as I fumbled with the keys. As he pulled out his cart, filled with an assortment of cleaning supplies and tools, he glanced at me, almost amusingly, and asked, "New here?" "Yeah, it's my first night. Any tips?" I replied, eager to learn anything that might ease my nerves. "Stick to the rules, and you'll be just fine, kid," he said, before turning back to his cart. He wheeled it toward the elevator, the cart rattling softly behind him. As he stepped inside, the doors closed with a quiet thud, leaving me alone again. Ronald's words did little to ease my nerves. I was still trying to figure out what those rules might really mean, and why seemingly mundane rules would be so important to follow. When I returned to my desk, I noticed almost immediately a space on the key rack. A key was now missing. The key to room 309. Panic rose in my chest as I rifled through the key rack again, hoping it was just hiding among the others. Where the hell did it go? I muttered to myself, feeling a bead of sweat form on my forehead. I had barely left the desk for more than a minute. Had someone come in while I was with Ronald? Or had I just missed it during my last count? I quickly pulled out my notes, scanning for the rule about the ham sandwich. There it was. If key 309 is missing, bring a ham and cheese sandwich to the room and knock, avoiding eye contact. I sighed, resigning myself to follow the rule. Heading into the kitchen, I was surprised to find it fully stocked, despite the hotel's long period of inactivity. The shelves were lined with canned goods and an impressive assortment of fresh ingredients, as if someone had prepared for a busy night. I quickly gathered the supplies and assembled a ham sandwich, placing it carefully on a plate. With the plate in hand, I took a deep breath and headed for the elevator. The fluorescent lights flickered as I pressed the button for the 3rd floor, and I felt a twinge of unease as I rode up. When the doors opened, I walked down the hallway, the carpet muffling my footsteps. I approached room 309 and knocked gently on the door, my heart racing. I heard shuffling inside, and after a moment, the door creaked open. I instinctively lowered my head, avoiding any eye contact. A figure stood in the doorway, reaching out to take the plate from my hands. They lingered there for an extra moment, as if waiting to see if I would look up. I kept my head down, my heart pounding in my chest. After a tense pause, the figure shut the door quietly, leaving me standing in the dim hallway, a chill running down my spine. I let out my breath, realizing now that I had been holding it. I turned and walked away, the feeling of being watched weighing heavily on me. What is with this fucking hotel, I thought. I got in the elevator, feeling relieved to head back to the safety of my desk. What were with all these rules anyway? What kind of hotel is this? Questions raced through my brain as I took the ride back down to the lobby. The elevator descended, and as it approached the lobby, I got closer to the doors, anticipating my exit. Only it didn't stop at the lobby. It kept going down. Panic washed over me as I realized what was happening. The basement. No, 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 I said as the elevator descended. I desperately smashed my hand against the buttons, hitting any floor that would possibly bring me back up. But the elevator didn't stop. Forcing myself to calm down, I remembered the rules, and I shut my eyes tightly, clenching my fists at my sides. The elevator dinged and the doors opened, unleashing a rush of cold air that sent a shiver down my spine. The damp, musty smell filled my nostrils. I stood there, back against the wall, heart pounding, waiting anxiously to see what would happen next. Then I heard something. Something moving, slow and deliberate, getting closer. The smell hit me like a punch to the gut, a putrid stench that filled the air and clawed at my throat. It was a sickening blend of rot and decay that seemed to wrap around me, making it hard to breathe. The elevator creaked, and I felt it move slightly, as if something heavy, very heavy, had entered it. I could feel it, whatever it was, right there, right against me, hovering right in front of my face. My pulse was racing, and tears began to stream down my face. I could feel it staring at me, like a predator, waiting, praying for me to open my eyes. What was probably only seconds felt like an eternity of pure horror. Just then, the doors dinged again, and I felt myself moving back upward. I slowly opened my eyes to find the doors now open, looking back out to the lobby and the grand staircase. I ran out of the elevator, ready to rush out of the front doors and quit on the spot. But that's when I noticed it. Dawn was breaking outside and a new envelope was sat on top of the desk. Hesitantly, I opened the envelope, sniffling like a child and wiping the tears from my face. Inside the envelope was another $500 check and a note. Great job on your first shift. As a thank you, we have included your pay up front for tomorrow night. If you choose to not return, feel free to keep the check as a courtesy from us, but we hope you do return. You are a valuable addition to the Arcadian Hotel family. Management. I took the check and left the hotel, fully convinced I would never return. That was last night. Back home, I've paced my small apartment all day, the check burning a hole in my pocket, and the sunlight giving me a sense of security. I wanted to quit. The nightmares and anxiety of last night are too much. But then I thought about my bills, my empty fridge, the weight of my loans. I've been staring at this check, The memory of Ronald's words echoing in my mind. Stick to the rules, and you'll be just fine, kid. Maybe I can figure it out. Maybe I can endure just a little longer. I've resolved to return to the hotel. I will follow the rules, keep my head down, and stay focused on the prize. Tonight, I will walk into that hotel again, ready to face whatever horrors await me. The money is too enticing to walk away from, and maybe I can even find out whatever is going on with the Arcadian Hotel. After all, it's just a job, right? Brace yourself. The horrors are only beginning. The next tale is even darker. I was testing a submersible in the Norwegian trench. At 700 meters down, something very strange occurred. I guess your career path can take a sudden turn. I used to spend hours slicing through chlorinated water, racing my own shadow down those perfectly spaced blue-tiled lanes. I was supposed to be at the Olympics once. I was that close. I'm not even joking. But torn rotator cuffs and a few failed surgeries later, my dreams sank like a stone. A job in the water with bad rotator cuffs isn't easy to find either. Most companies don't want to take a chance on someone who might struggle lifting even 20 pounds above their head. So I've been desperate. I've been taking gig work mostly. For a while, I was teaching basic scuba classes to tourists, getting them ready for certification. But lately, I've been getting hired by a company called Fjord Explorations. They've developed some new submersibles and are testing them in the Norwegian trench, and one of my old coaches is involved with the company. His wife is one of the investors. It's a tiny metal sphere covered with cameras, claustrophobic if you let it get to you, part of a new line of business that Fjord Explorations is venturing into. Deep-sea exploration for the everyday consumer, designed to drop way, way deeper than any regular Joe is ever really meant to go, pushing the boundaries of what we know about visiting seafloors. Honestly, as the test has been getting closer, I've been psyched. I'm going down 700 meters and giving feedback on their first human passenger test. I'm also low-key terrified, but it's not like I was going to say no. Inside the submersible was freezing, way colder than I expected. The pod was tiny. Imagine you're in a spherical MRI machine, standing upright, fully strapped in. The entire front panel of the pod is a special glass, a viewing porthole. They're sending me down, pulling me up. Easy. Ready, Maria? Crackled through the speakers, snapping me back to the here and now. I stared out the porthole at the water. It was this endless, gorgeous blue that was just begging me to come get lost in it. Shit, I guess so, I replied, adding a grin. With a lurch, the pod began its descent. 50 meters. I watched as the world outside shifted from bright turquoise to this dark, almost navy blue. Sunlight still pierced through, casting streaks across the water like an underwater cathedral. The kelp swayed gently, and I could see schools of fish darting around. 100 meters, it was getting murkier. The sunlight faded, replaced by a deep blue that was almost hypnotic. Visuals are still good, Control said over the speakers. 200 meters. I could feel the weight of the ocean pressing in, squeezing the pod. The light outside was nearly gone, and all I saw were shadows. Strange shapes drifted by. Maybe fish, maybe something else, but it was hard to tell. The deeper I went, the less anything looked familiar. 300 meters. The pod's lights clicked on, casting a faint glow into the darkness. It was eerie, the way the beam just vanished into the black, like the ocean was swallowing it whole. The pressure built with every meter down, squeezing in, like the ocean's giving the pod a hug that just kept getting tighter. I tried to keep my breathing steady, my eyes flicking over the gauges. Depth, pressure, oxygen. So far, so good. Camera feed seems to be struggling, Control said. Shit, really? I asked. Let's hope the connection resolves itself. Radar's still clear, they said. The descent continued. 500 meters. It was completely dark. I mean, it was dark in a way you don't really get until you're down there. I'd always liked my alone time, but this was next-level isolation. Even my thoughts sounded louder than they should. 700 meters. It felt like the ocean was closing in, squeezing tighter and tighter. The pod's lights barely cut through the darkness, and suddenly, there they were. Hulking shadows looming just beyond the beam. The outlines of massive ships covered in barnacles, rusted and broken, their skeletons frozen in time. World War II vessels, I realized, swallowed by the sea decades ago. Huge, shadowy figures moved among the wreckage, their serpentine bodies coiling around rusted beams. Massive eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the pod's light. They looked like something out of a nightmare, long serpentine bodies with rippling fins, massive eyes that glowed faintly, watching me. And then in the distance, I saw her. A mermaid, her eyes locked on mine. She was beautiful in a haunting way, her long hair floating like it had a life of its own. Her eyes were empty, cold, like they'd seen 1,000 shipwrecks and dragged 1,000 souls to the depths. It almost looked like she was conjuring all of this, like these monsters and ghost ships were her creation, her puppets in the dark water. Revenge for thou, sand, ships, revenge for equals, you drowned, us, with. The words were broken, disjointed, but I knew they were coming from her. They sent a shiver down my spine. Control. I think I'm hallucinating, I whispered. It was the only thing that made sense. Giant sea monsters and ghost ships aren't real, right? This had to be some kind of pressure-induced, oxygen-starved trip. Suddenly, there was a loud, crunching noise, and the pod shuddered violently. Yet it was so real. I knew deep down I wasn't hallucinating. Then, one of the ships crashed into the pod, the sound echoing through the small cabin. I could almost hear the groaning of metal, like a deep, ancient sigh, as if the ocean itself resented my intrusion. Maria, stay calm, Control said, voices overlapping, urgent now. Your readings are, hold on, we're seeing a drop-in. The radio crackled, then cut off entirely, leaving me in total silence. Then there was a loud hiss, and the air inside the pod thinned out. The following happened in an instant. I will try to describe best I can remember it. It felt as though the pod was struck from behind by something else. Maybe another ship. I could sense the pod was about to split apart from the pressure. My heart rate was cruising up and up. I was staring at the pod ceiling, wondering if it might give out. Then the banging on the front porthole started. Thump, thump, thump. It was her, slamming her fists against the glass. She stopped, then slowly reached through the glass, as if it wasn't there, wrapping her amphibious fingers around my right wrist, squeezing it with more pressure than I could have ever imagined. She was going to break it, I knew it. Revenge for Eichels, you. My vision blurred and I tried to focus, tried to breathe, but my head felt light and everything started fading. The last thing I heard was the pod systems winding down, like some eerie lullaby. Then, total blackness, nothing. When I came to, it was the harsh, buzzing lights of the Fjord Explorations office that greeted me. My head was pounding, and I was wrapped in this scratchy-ass blanket that smelled like it had been in storage for a while. Across from me were two HR types, looking at me like I was some science experiment gone wrong. Maria, can you hear us? One of them asked, leaning forward like he was talking to a kid. I blinked, trying to piece together what was real. Yeah, I croaked. What happened? The guy glanced at his tablet, scrolling through something. We're still figuring that out. The pod systems registered a depressurization event, but when we pulled you up, everything was fine. Fine? I repeated, my brain still foggy. I saw things down there. It wasn't fine. The woman beside him cleared her throat, frowning. We reviewed the footage, and I'm sorry to say we lost signal about 300 meters down. I stared at her, my mouth dry. You're kidding me, I finally said. We're going to have you checked out by medical. The guy said, his voice that fake calm people use when they think you're about to lose it. Just to make sure everything's okay. Yeah, I mumbled, barely listening. My eyes were drifting down to my right wrist, where I could see that it was swollen and bruised. It was already a mixture of deep purple. Blood was pooling under my skin. We think you may have freaked out and had a panic attack, he said. Fix your fucking cameras, I snapped back to him. After being cleared by medical, I was sent home on leave, to take a couple weeks off and recover. My wrist healed pretty quickly. I've spent the last week thinking about what happened down there. You could say what happened has become my Moby Dick. I have to get back and figure out what's happening down there. Online, I've been searching like crazy, but the Norwegian trench is quite young by trench standards, only 1 million years old or so. But I did find something. Apparently, during World War II, the Norwegian trench is famous for having 36 ships sunk that were carrying chemical weapons. The attack was approved by the Norwegian government. Never recovered. So I wonder if this has to do with what I heard down there. Revenge for chemicals they drowned in. but the thousand ships part doesn't make any sense. I think this mermaid figure knows the full story. My apartment isn't far from it, where we dropped the pod. I'll catch myself glancing out the window at the fjord. The water looks so calm, so normal, but I know better now. I've seen what's down there, even if no one else believes me. Just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, the next story proves you wrong. I remember the first time I saw it. I had been walking my dog down my street, minding my own business, when something caught my eye on the other side of my next-door neighbor, Mr. Carlson's lawn. After standing there for a moment, unable to put my finger on it, I eventually noticed a key, just hanging there in the doorknob of his front door. Not thinking too much of it, I went on with my walk and immediately forgot about it. But then the next day, I saw it again. As did I the next day after that, and the next day after that. Eventually, after a week had passed, I started to get worried. See, the thing is, I would have maybe written off the key as a simple mistake before going on a trip. But Mr. Carlson was quite old and frail, and had stopped leaving his house a long time ago, depending on caretakers for groceries and basic home goods. Which brought me to my next conclusion, that it must have been one of his caretakers. But then I remembered that they stopped by his house every few days, and surely would have noticed the key. Finally, after 2 weeks of indecision, I worked up the courage to walk over to Mr. Carlson's door, place my hand on the doorknob, the key still hanging from it, and turn the knob. As I turned it, I couldn't help but hear a faint echo, like the sound of a couple people shouting from 100 yards away. I stopped and looked around. Nothing. I turned back to the door and opened it. Fearing the worst, I braced myself, closing my eyes. Upon opening them, I simply saw an empty foyer and let out a sigh of relief. But what I didn't know was that the worst thing that I feared was nowhere near what I'd soon discover. "Mr. Carlson," I called out before shutting the door behind me. Click. Suddenly the lights went out, and I saw them. Mr. Carlson and Brenda, our neighborhood post office worker, sitting on the staircase together, a look of horror in their eyes. Mr. Carlson, what a relief. And Brenda? I haven't seen her in a week, I thought to myself, remembering the past week's strange lack of mail that everyone in the neighborhood had been talking about. Looking back on it, I should have put 2 and 2 together. But what possibly could the disappearance of our mail person and a key in my neighbor's door have in common? I was about to find out. "Brenda, what are you doing in Mr. Carlson's house?" She simply replied, "The key." "Oh, it's yours?" I asked, letting out a sigh of relief, after spending 2 weeks running through every possible reason for it being left in the door. But before I could bask in the moment, she interrupted me. "No, it's not mine, or his," she said, before turning to Mr. Carlson, who looked exhausted. "It belongs to him," the old man said. "Him?" I asked, confused by where he was going with it. "The man who visits us," Brenda said. "Visits you? What do you mean?" "Just wait, he'll be back, especially now that you're here," Mr. Carlson said. "He's right. I entered just like you did after dropping off the mail and wondering if something was the matter, finding Mr. Carlson here and that I was trapped inside. And within a few minutes, the man arrived." Brenda explained. "Wait, what are you trying to tell me?" "That you're trapped here," the old man said. "Trapped?" I laughed. "Yeah, okay. Is this some sort of Halloween prank? What with the lights off and everything?" That's when I casually walked back over to the door and tried to open it. Click, but it didn't budge. I stood there for a moment with my back to Brenda and Mr. Carlson, wondering if maybe there was some truth to what they were saying. And that's when I heard him. "See?" A hoarse, disturbing voice called out from behind me. "They're right. You're trapped." Chills ran down my spine as I realized that the voice couldn't be coming from Brenda or Mr. Carlson. I couldn't bear to turn around, so I simply called back to the voice. "Who are you?" "I'm the keeper of the keys to your worst nightmares." I turned around to find a man standing there in the darkness, his eyes glowing and keychains dangling from every inch of his body. "Let us out!" I screamed at him, pretending to be courageous, but terrified by the mere sight of such a thing. He simply replied, "Certainly," before looking at his body and removing a particular keychain with one key on it. "Yes, this one's for you," he said as he handed it to me. "This will open the front door from the inside. Go ahead, leave." I looked at the key, then back at the door, then back at the monster, and smiled. "You idiot. Why would you ever give it to me? I'll be back with the police, and you better not be here." Then I walked over to the front door and inserted the key. "Don't do it," Brenda cried out. "He's tricking you," Mr. Carlson added, but I was too compelled by my plan to listen to them and proceeded to turn the doorknob. Click. It opened. "See?" I said, as I turned back to Brenda and Mr. Carlson with a smug look on my face. They simply shook their heads in disappointment. I turned back, opened the door, stepped outside, and shut it behind me, to find myself in a bedroom. My childhood bedroom, to be exact. "What the?" I thought to myself, as once again, chills ran down my spine. Feeling unsettled by being in there, I opened the door and entered the second-story hallway, where I heard the sound of someone being strangled in a nearby bedroom. Normally, I would have been shocked to hear such sound, but this was one that I had heard before. This was a memory that I was reliving in real life now as an adult. A tear rolled down my cheek as I knew exactly what was happening in the other room, and despite my attempts to hold back, I couldn't stop myself from rushing into the bedroom and trying to stop him. But just as it had unfolded in real life, many years ago, by the time I opened the door, it was too late. My father was dead, strangled to death by my brothers for reasons I'd only later find out. "Andrew?" "No," I cried out. But he had already crawled back into the corner of the room, simply staring at my father's lifeless body. That's when he looked up at me and charged at me like a ravenous zombie, managing to claw away at one of my arms before. Slam! I shut the door and ran downstairs, expecting to find my mother down there, just as I had found her when the event had originally happened. But all that I found was Brenda and Mr. Carlson, staring up at me with wide eyes. "I'm sorry," Brenda said, seeing the expression on my face. "How did you know?" "Because it happened to us, over and over, no matter which key he handed us." "No, it can't be," I cried out as I began to shut down, unable to believe what they had told me. But I should have. As I stood there, shaking in horror, I heard the sound of keys rattling, and I turned around to find the monster standing there again. "What do you want?" I cried out. But he didn't answer. He simply looked down at his body and removed a particular keychain with one key on it. "Yes, this one's for you," he said as he handed it to me. I looked at the key, then back at the door, then back at the monster, this time unable to smile. I knew another horror lay before me. Knew that the key would not help me escape the house, but for reasons I can't quite explain, maybe I thought there was an inkling of a chance that the key would work. Or maybe it was a desire to see my father again. I took it anyway, took it and opened the door, only to relive the same horrifying memory and return back to the staircase where Brenda and Mr. Carlson were standing. Once again, the monster returned. Once again, he handed me a key, and once again, I disappeared through the door. This went on until I couldn't bear to take it anymore, and eventually gave up on the keys being of any help. When I finally declined the man's key, he simply replied, "Have it your way," before disappearing into the darkness. I turned to Brenda and Mr. Carlson, who went on to explain how they, too, had tried the keys and experienced nightmare after nightmare from their respective past. Then we all retired to the living room, where we slept on the couch, chair, and floor, respectively, reasoning that we should stay in the same room. The next day, we huddled together, eventually coming to the conclusion that the house, its door, and the keys must be some sort of twisted test, caused by the key in the home's front door, and enforced by the monster that wore an armor of keyrings. We tried everything, from scouring the home for exits, to attempting to make calls on its dead phones, to prying at its boarded windows from the inside out. But after a week had gone by without a single lead, we eventually gave up. That's when someone else arrived. "No!" We all screamed, our voices surely echoing outside just as I heard them, as Officer Howe turned the key to the front door and let himself in. By the time the door had closed behind him, it was too late, and 3 had become 4. Once again, the monster returned, this time offering Officer Howe a key, who took it and let himself out, experiencing a nightmare of his own, only to return from upstairs a short time later with a look of horror in his eyes. After we told him our stories, he too declined the monster's next key, and we once again huddled together, eventually deciding that the answer must not lie in the house itself, but with the monster. But how do I stop it? I wondered. The next time he arrived, we tried to forcibly attack him as a group, but he simply waved his hand and froze us all in place until he disappeared back into the darkness. That's when I got an idea and took off after him into the darkness, following him for what felt like hours through a dark void until he reached a bedroom of his own. "What is this place?" I asked. "My own nightmare," he replied as he turned to a younger version of himself, asleep in bed. Suddenly, I saw a window slowly pry open as a masked man broke in and moved towards the young man with a knife. Not knowing what else to do, I sprang to the young man's rescue, darting toward the intruder and grappling with him, waking the young man, who watched on in horror as the masked man was somehow impaled on his own knife and toppled out the window. After catching my breath, I turned back to the young man, who had a smile on his face. "Thank you," he said as he handed me a key. I stood there in silence, unable to believe what had happened, before turning back to the monster, who I assumed had been watching the whole time. But he was gone. I turned back to the young man, who was still staring at me, then stumbled backwards out of his room and back into the darkness, where I turned around and walked back in the direction I had come from. When I finally emerged from the darkness, holding the key, I found Brenda, Mr. Carlson, and Officer Howe all standing there in the foyer, a look of shock on all their faces, having clearly expected that I would never return. I didn't say anything. I simply walked over to the home's front door, inserted the key, and opened it. Suddenly, a ray of sunshine burst into the home. I took a step outside and stood there for a moment until my eyes eventually adjusted to the daylight, and I found myself outside Mr. Carlson's home. The door still open, I looked back inside the home and saw Brenda, Mr. Carlson, and Officer Howe standing there in disbelief. I signaled for them to join me. Brenda and Officer Howe followed with big smiles on their faces, overjoyed to escape the horrors in the home. But Mr. Carlson, he simply stayed behind. "Mr. Carlson, what are you waiting for?" But he didn't reply. He simply took a seat on the staircase. "Do me a favor. When you shut the door, leave the key inside the doorknob," the old man said. "But why?" I asked, unable to understand why he would choose to stay inside the place. "So I can see my son again," he explained. I then closed the front door of the house and looked down at its now keyless doorknob before reaching into my pocket for the key that the young man had given me. Officer Howe ran over to stop me, but it was too late. I had already placed the key in the doorknob and locked the door. He gave me a look of horror as I turned to see my wife pulling into my driveway next door. I looked over at her, and after spending what felt like weeks inside Mr. Carlson's home, expected her to be shocked to see me. But my wife simply waved hello, as if I had never left. "Don't forget to walk the dog," she called out casually, before turning off the car and walking away into our home next door, as Brenda and Officer Howe looked over at me, still shocked by what they had just experienced. Think you've heard it all? Think again. This next one will make you question reality. You can call me Rash, Sergeant Rash Buzescu of the Romanian Army. This is what happened to me in October 2022. I was in a military unit in the delta of the Danube, in the north of the Dobroja region of Romania, under the border with Ukraine. A little bit of context for those unfamiliar with the places. That region of Ukraine is southern Bessarabia, sandwiched between Romania and the Republic of Moldova, and it used to be Romanian territory. It has had a turbulent past, belonging during the centuries to many states, being strategically important. In those days, a lot of confusion and fear were present in Romania. Being close to war, rumors of incidents made things very tense. People were afraid. Several Romanian military aircraft were brought down. The Ukrainian forces admitted they did it accidentally. Romania, being a NATO country, any incident like this could degenerate into a war with either Russia or Ukraine, and Romania to be in the front line of destruction of World War III. That night we heard explosions before the alarm was set. It seems some missiles coming from the north of the border hit Romanian targets. It was a chilly autumn evening. It would not be the last incident of this sort. We did not know if they were the Ukrainians or the Russians. The colonel summoned us to prepare for marching to the target. The delta of the river Danube is split between Romania and Ukraine. It is one of the last true wild ecosystems in Europe, an official biosphere reservation. It is basically a huge marshland where the Danube splits in smaller channels until it flows into the Black Sea. We followed orders, of course, in silence, in the thicket. The explosion stopped. Some fires in the distance were visible. We could not make out if they were across the border or not. Suddenly, gunshots were heard not very far. We were ordered to be prepared for combat. Another military unit was pretty close. They were dispatched first. When we finally reached the location of the first flames, we could see that there was an explosion earlier in the evening on Romanian soil. On the other side of the border, things were burning as well. Our comrades from the other unit have reached the location. Some were already fallen, dead or wounded. In fact, most of them were down. It was here. War. For real. For the first time. It felt unreal. I was a soldier. I knew this was my purpose, but it was not supposed to be like this. It felt unreal also. It did not expect it. I mean, in Romanian history, as we were taught in school, Romanians fought bravely against our enemies, against the Ottomans, the Hungarians, the Soviets, and the Nazi. But then at least it was clear whom and why we were fighting. Now we did not. Finally, we found a living soldier. He was breathing heavily when the colonel shouted at him, "Report. What has happened?" The private answered, "They attacked us. They fought each other. On the other side, then they came to us." The Russians? We don't know. We were bombarded and they came shooting. They looked insane and fired at us like they had rabies, honestly. At this point, he was breathing hard. The colonel left him, looked around in the silence, and ordered us to cross the bridge into Ukrainian territory. We obeyed. We were soldiers. Soldiers obey orders. But we knew what this meant. A part of me wanted to just flee. No, I was not afraid of death or physical injury. I was afraid of being part of this and suffering and dying sensely and shamefully. I would have preferred to have been dead by some previous disease or something to have killed me before getting into this. I even hoped a loose bullet would take down now before being engaged in the fight. I was not old, I was in my late 20s, but I wanted to die with a clean conscience then to get on with this. I thought of running and being put to trial like a deserter. Perhaps I would have been executed. The thoughts rose up, one after the other, in my mind. We crossed the bridge, and the colonel brought us as the last remains of daylight disappeared in thicket. I didn't even know if the colonel knew what he wanted. It doesn't matter anyway. Trees form like a small forest. On the other side of the border, almost complete darkness and chill. A shadow creeped upon my heart. It was something else, something different from what I felt before. A fear not just of death, a fear not just of dishonor. It was something else that engulfed all my previous fears, worked alongside them, and made them stronger. Then it started. They ran and fired. I could not make out if they shouted in Russian or Ukrainian, or both. I do not understand either. And the uniforms were not clear. They fired at us, each other, in every direction. Colonel ordered to engage in fire. We complied. I fired at any non-Romanian soldier I could see holding the gun towards us. Some seemed to have been Ukrainian, some Russian. I did not care. It did not matter. Some of them were hit, some of us were hit. I became numb. I desperately knew I had not just to protect myself, but my comrades. At least this was something I could do, something to hold on to, and not just pointing the gun at me and finishing me off. It seems I already killed several people the first time in my life. Were they allies? Were they foes? I did not know. Something was tearing inside my soul, a part of me. Yes, I have made a great mistake joining the military. I was not made for this, at least not in this situation. I think I could have been a war hero, but in World War II, not in World War III. This was my thought, as the Russians and/or Ukrainians mingled with us. I felt no physical pain, as they hit me chaotically, and I responded as non-chaotical as I could. A warm liquid touched my hand gently. I realized it came from my shoulder. I was hit by a bullet and did not even realize it. The enemies looked, like the comrade said earlier, like being on rabies. Their eyes wide in terror, mouths opened. They charged at us, but were also running from us. As we entered the woods, the clash became even more chaotic as darkness engulfed us, and little to no light was visible. My heart was beating hard as we lost it and started running with no sense deeper inside the woods, like being driven. Incidents became fewer, the clash went cold, and silence took over almost completely. I continued to run deeper, in the darkness. I heard callings in Romanian. I asked one of them, then decided not to, in order not to attract attention to myself. It was cold, bitter darkness. Suddenly I hit something, in the dark. Something that blacked my way like some kind of net that held me fiercely. No, I was not tangled, more like glued to it. I tried to force my way out of it, but the more I forced it, the less I was able to release myself. My mind felt almost completely helpless of handling this new thing, and it started to shut down. Yet, like a faint whisper, a thought came to my mind. Take the knife, combat knife, from your boot, while you still can, and cut it out. Fast. I obeyed the thought and managed to get the knife. Fortunately, my right arm was almost completely free of the thing, and I was able to grab it and started cutting. It was hard to achieve this at first, but I think it was good that it was hard. If it came to easy, my mind would not have calmed down, would have not settled down, and I would have restarted running blindly. I was desperate at first, seeing that it was so hard to cut, especially since I clearly felt I needed to get out as fast as I could. As I struggled with the process, I started to become aware of my situation and surroundings, and even if I knew I had every reason to finish it as soon as possible, I was able to evaluate my situation and what was around me more calmly. Few people were around at this point. Few gunshots, some screams from time to time. The darkness felt unreal and intoxicating. I tried to get rid of this thought, as was starting to get hold of myself, but I could not escape it. And something like whispered in my thoughts, something very bad will happen to me soon, if I do not get out soon from there. Indeed, as I was getting close to cutting it completely, I heard a rumble in the trees behind this net, from up towards me. For the last 2 seconds before breaking free, I even caught a glimpse of something moving, but I escaped and went backwards. This time, I was determined not to lose myself so easily, and although I was far from being safe, I walked slowly and, eventually, decided to stop and evaluate. The almost complete darkness felt unnatural, like some sort of black mist that, once entering the lungs, made my mind like being into some sort of drug. I thought this could be chemical weapons or something. I stood on the spot and opened a flashlight from my haversack. I was able to bring the light only for a few meters in front of me, like the light got lost into that mist. I was able to see the trees around, no person in sight. I went towards what seemed to me like the way out, slowly, looking around. Some small sounds were heard in the trees. Suddenly, in front of me, in the upper branches of the tree, I saw something white, standing there. It was shaped like a human, but engulfed like some sort of a whitish or grayish shroud, with legs tied together, like an Egyptian mummy. It twitched a little, and then I realized that the same matter the shroud was made from is the same as the leftovers of the net on my hands and uniform. The shape in the tree moved, and I realized pretty fast it was not moving on its own. Something moved the shape from behind, and I could see a dark thing, almost the size of the human shape, covering it, and some dark, articulated arms taking over the white shape. I could not bring myself to move and stop watching. The dark creature stabbed the white shape in the chest area and started some sort of sucking from it, voraciously. Dark fluid came out to the ground, and a striking, disgusting smell of blood mixed with something I did not know what it was. It was a spider eating its still living prey. I turned my flashlight around me, around the trees, and noticed that this tree was not the only one with victims wrapped in cocoons. My blood ran cold when I realized that above me, in the canopy, the spiders were moving. How many of them there were, I do not know. I started to run towards what seemed to me like the exit of the woods. No living person was in sight, although I could see corpses all over the place. From time to time, some cocoons swung in the wind or had fallen to the ground. I stumbled into one, almost falling. I could feel that almost nothing but bones were left, engulfed into some goo that stuck to my boot like a glue, sticking the tip of my foot with the cocoon, and I had used the second boot to let go, while I could hear clearly something above me, coming down, pretty close. I managed not to lose myself and escape just before an unbearable stench almost touched me. Less than a minute later, in front of me, on the trail, a thick web, with something really big moving on the other side. An insidious sensation of deep danger came over me as I watched the thing from behind. I went backwards, looking behind and around me, for a way out, on another track where I could see no web or creature. But this was a really bad idea as I stumbled more into the woods, especially since I was unfamiliar with the place. I stopped in my tracks for a while, trying to figure out what to do. I listened around me, faint noises around me, scratches not very far, but not too close either. No living soldiers, only dead or dying from time to time. Where was everybody? Has someone escaped? There was no way of knowing. I was trained to face difficult situations, but this was beyond all I ever imagined, as this new enemy was unlike any I prepared to face. I needed to meet someone, anybody. I sat down, listened and sniffed. Yeah, I sniffed. Strange odors, marsh combined with weird, unpleasant smells. The darkness itself felt unnatural in itself, like it was absorbing light, so to say. The flashlight could not reach far. It was like it faded into some fluid. Was I afraid of death? Yes, I was. But that was not all. I would have preferred a death that I could understand, a death I could expect if it makes sense, but not this. I did not understand what was going on, and that made me feel that all my experiences, all my training was not just useless, but also senseless. I kneeled on one leg and looked at the ground, not knowing what to do. I listened, trying to calm myself even further so that my rational mind shall find a way. Then I heard a rustle in the tree next to me. I had the first impulse to just run, but something in mind told me it was a bad idea. I do not know why. I turned back slowly towards the source of the sound, making sure not to point the light directly at it. I was clearly a spider. It was almost 2 meters long, and it dropped something towards me. I snapped and jumped towards the place I came from, but another of those creatures was in there. Then I heard gunshots from sideways, sounded like an AKM. Bullet flew above my head, like someone aimed at the creature behind me. It gave a shriek, and it seemed to stop. I dared not to move, waiting for a ceasefire. And it did. I heard footsteps coming fast towards me. I noticed my benefactor. It was a tall, muscular woman with long black hair. I noticed the Ukrainian flag on her uniform. She came fast towards me, grabbed my arm and pushed me towards some bushes I had not looked before. I let her guide me. It felt like she knew the place. I could not ask anything. We were silent. She gasped for air as she pushed me. I hope it is clear there. We shall see, she said. What to be clear? I asked. A small underground shed or refuge, she replied. I think I can find it. My flashlight was a clear advantage, being able to see it, even if at a short distance, the webs, and we were able to avoid them. Those things were in the trees, mostly, not on soil, fortunately. Even if, at some point, a pretty large one charged at us. I think we missed it. We need to go back, she added and turned us around. I could hear a rustle behind us, but not too close. It felt like we moved in circles for about 5 minutes. I felt much longer, but I am sure it could not have been more. Until she knocked with her boot something almost completely covered in fallen autumn leaves. We stopped. Here it is, she said, as she started to remove the leaves, showing a hatch, then going down to open it. As I went down too, to help her, I felt a sharp pain in my shoulder, where the bullet hit me, but I did not care too much. She succeeded in opening the hatch, but something blocked the full opening. A few bullets burst from inside, as the rustle from behind came closer, and I knew that, if there is to get in, we should do it fast. She shouted something in Russian or Ukrainian. A male voice responded from below. They argued a bit, until I said, if he lets us in, do it in the next seconds. It is very close. As a spider about the size of a 10-year-old child was only a few meters away. She started to plead, and it worked. The man managed to push the improvised barricade at the hatch to let us in. The woman went first. As the creature came closer, I struggled to turn around, in order to keep my eyes on the spider, as it was inches from me. I placed, without realizing it, the flashlight towards the creature. 2 things happened at the same time. First one, I saw a being that was deeply dark, so dark that it made shiver, emanating something like it wanted to consume me as fast as possible, something I could feel in its eyes that I could not distinguish, but that I could feel strongly they were there, in that giant black mass. The second one, was that the creature stopped in its tracks when the beam of light hit where I felt the eyes were for a few seconds. Those seconds were enough for me to get through the hatch. I tried to close it, but the pain in the shoulder made me unable to pull, and a dark shape covered the little light coming from outside. Coldness took over my body, and the stench made me nauseated. I could hear sounds of a mouth chewing nothing in anticipation of chewing my flesh. A harsh, sticky, hairy, black articulated arm entered just for a few seconds, before a bullet from inside hit the arm. A shriek with splatter and the arm retreated, just enough as a thin man, wearing a Russian uniform, came, pulled the hatch, then locked it. Fortunately, I did not drop the flashlight, and a second flashlight, held by the man, made enough light to see underneath. It was a small underground structure, more like a refuge. I am not sure if this was to be a refuge or some storage place, since many provisions seemed to be deposited, mostly crates covered in dark green canvases. The man went towards the end of the corridor. There were a few rooms on the left and right, but he went to a larger one at the end. Some chairs, a blanket, some food on the floor, guns. The two spoke in Russian and/or Ukrainian. "Sorry to interrupt, folks. Could we speak English, please? I do not know either Russian or Ukrainian," I said. They stopped and looked at me. He answered, "Okay then, it makes sense." I looked at him. He appeared around the age of 40, pretty thin and short, but stocky in a way. His almost complete shaved head was covered with a small military cap. "What is going on?" I said. They stood silent for a few seconds. Then the man started, not breathing too easily, like trying to remain calm. "We fought for about 2 days before they came. We did not plan shooting into Romanian territory. But as casualties arose in such a short time, weirdness started. As lack of sleep builded up, some of us start to act weird, not all in the same way. At first, they were only dreams and hallucinations. I do not think they were hallucinations now, of being attacked in their beds by some small creatures. Some showed small scars on their bodies, but they were dismissed, since we were in the middle of a battle. Some started to turn on each other. The colonel ordered detention, then all who behaved aggressively were shot. The Ukrainians kept fighting. We had to fight back. Soon we did not know how much we fought the enemy and how much we fought each other. I did not know who I could trust, if I could follow orders or not. Then those things started to appear. I did not pay much attention to them, trying to keep myself from being killed by my comrades. But I could not deny it when I first saw a black spider, near the edge of the camp, eating away from the still living body of our cook. I managed to get close to Yuri, one of my comrades who felt still sane, and we retreated in the center of the camp until the order came to leave a large part of the equipment and get into the woods near the border, and we were dragged alongside the rest. In the fields, those creatures attacked us, some trying to fight back. But even from those who we still able to understand, this is a new, non-human enemy we had to deal against, seemed too confused and unable to fight back properly. I heard we were about to clash with the Ukrainian foe, that the Romanians seemed to have crossed the border as a response of the provocation, when me and Yuri managed to run away and get into the woods on our own. But the spiders were there, more of them and larger. Yuri was caught by a very large one. Just before I stumbled across the hatch, I found my way in and barricaded the entrance. The woman started. Pretty similar things happened to us as well. Small spiders were seen at first, biting people, who started acting weird. Unfortunately, our colonel was affected pretty early on and started just shooting people. The major shot the colonel and shouted, "He is the new commander." Some protested, and someone I could not identify shot the major. The floodgates were open, and my comrades started turning on each other. I hid myself up to a point. Then, like in his case, I was taken with the flow, as the people started to head towards the woods. I gave a sigh and looked at them. You know, my country may be enemies with any of your countries. I understand not to talk about certain aspects. But right now, what matters is that those things are a common enemy, and in the end, all of us are human. We need to work together to escape. They looked at me. The woman smiled and nodded. The man gave a sigh and nodded as well. I think it is okay to introduce ourselves. I am Sergeant Radosh Buzescu, Romanian Army. The woman said, Lieutenant Olena Kerkova, Ukrainian Army. The man said, Private Dmitry Fyodorov, Russian Army. We shook hands and started talking on a strategy. Elena tried to help me with my shoulder. Some stinky goo was on my uniform. Fortunately, it was barely more than a scratch, and she managed to keep it covered from the goo. We ate a bit, took some vodka, then went to the entrance to listen. I found out that Dmitry was from Yekaterinburg, that he lost his father when he was in primary school. He told us he used to be religious as a child, then he became colder into faith but not atheist. He told us he prayed for the first time in a while tonight, and he feels that only God can help us. Elena told us that she was from Kiev, that she joined the army years ago, that she was always a competitive girl as a child and teen, who loved female action heroes, that she was a convinced feminist. Then, after a while, being disappointed in real-life military life, left it and became a hairstylist. She held a YouTube channel where she posted ASMR videos with haircuts, hairstyling and massages while being dressed sexy. The channel gained some following. She did some interventions, like pumping her lips. She planned breast augmentation. When war came, she was called to arms on the basis of her previous formation. I told them that I was from Suceava, in the north, that I was not particularly religious, that I became a soldier due to the war games and RPGs I played as a teen, and that I justified it to myself somewhat thinking of the patriotic literature I was taught in primary school. I told them I was never truly religious, that I went to the Easter service, to weddings and funerals, and that was about it. Dmitry told me it makes a good idea to start praying now, and he showed us the cross his late grandmother gave him that he never stopped wearing. The surroundings were mostly silent, but we did not dare to come out, as we still felt their presence, like waiting for us to get out. I started. Those flashlights shall not be out of batteries soon. The night is still pretty long, so we need to decide quickly what to do. I hear them screeching on the outside. Is there any way for them to break in? Elena replied. There are some ventilation shafts, sideways, as far as I know, but they are pretty narrow. I don't know if there are little ones, as they seem to change size, they may enter. I say to secure them, I answered. They agreed, and we started searching each chamber for the vents. They were pretty narrow. They were not hard to cover with cloth, although the metal covers were kind of rusty. We have had enough supplies for a few days, and decided to put the flashlights off and stick them together near the entrance and watch the clock from time to time. We allowed ourselves to sleep for about 90 minutes at a time, but never all at once. As we sat, we felt like some force, let's say, I cannot find a better term, in the air, something that took away slowly my will to fight and live, and I started not just feel, but also live like it was just a question of time before I shall become the meal of the creatures, like they spread something in the very air we breathed and it entered our tissues. Neither of them seemed to know if this was a weapon of either armies. They seemed sincere enough. Dmitry started praying. He said he felt like it. The Paraclesis of the Mother of God. Then the Akatist of Saint Demetrios of Thessaloniki, who was his patron saint. We felt a clear release from the shadow on our souls, although not totally. I dared to have a little sleep, then Elena fell asleep alongside me. Suddenly, Dmitry woke us up. There is something in the first room on the right, he said. We secured them. What can it be? I asked. I do not know. Let's have a look. He answered. We managed to get up and open our flashlights and get into there. There was something screeching in there behind a wooden box. Carefully, Dmitry removed it to discover a dead mouse and, behind it, a hole between the floor and the wall, probably made by mice. Elena gave a sigh of relief, probably thinking it was a mouse. Dmitry looked carefully around, pointing with the flashlight around. I felt dread. I knew that was not a mouse that made those sounds, even if it used, probably, the mouse hole to enter. With my flashlight, I managed to get a glimpse of something larger than a rat, something black that ran away from my light, before jumping upon Dmitry's left leg and piercing the flesh through the pants. I hurried to help him, and I saw a black spider, larger than a tarantula, firmly embedded in his leg. Pointing the light upon it, it gave some sort of screech. It was clearly uncomfortable with the light, but it held on. I grabbed my knife and tried to stab it, between the head and the abdomen. It was not easy, as I had to be careful not to get bitten myself. Dmitry fell to the ground, and I used his lack of balance to crush the neck of the spider with the knife, and a black, sticky fluid came out of it. Dmitri grabbed it with a piece of canvas and pulled it out fast, with a grimace of pain, breaking its head from the rest. "No, you should not have done that," said Elena, going down next to him. "The mouthpieces will remain in the flesh." Dmitri was panting as the fluid started to stick to his clothes and the clothes to the skin. "Fast, we need to remove the head and the pants." I was a bit confused, since I did not know what to do. "We need to improvise. I shall try with a knife." What followed was a kind of brutish improvisation. I am not sure how much Elena knew what she was doing. She tried to pull out the mouthpieces from the wound with the knife. I think she kind of fumbled. I actually tried to call in Romania, since the border was close and I might have got some signal, but it did not work. Elena tried to wash the wound with some vodka. Dmitri endured pretty stoically, only with some moans. "We need to get him to a hospital as fast as we can. This could be lethal soon," said Elena. "Either death or losing my mind like those before me," replied Dmitri. "No, I do not think there's any way to reach any hospital soon. I think this is it." "Stop it," said Elena. "With this attitude, you shall die surely. Without it, at least you have a chance." Dmitri started laughing bitterly. "No, I know it. I feel. This is how it is supposed to happen. I prayed earlier. I am quite at peace now. You can either let me die, or if I get insane like the others, you can either shoot me or send me out to eat me." Olena looked at him with a mix of anger and frustrated desperation, but Dmitri continued. "One of us needs to die in order for the rest to escape. They shall enter this place before dawn, one way or the other. They are really hungry, and we know it. I prayed when you thought I was sleeping. I remember how Saint Demetrios, my patron saint, the Christian military imprisoned for Christ, prayed in prison that Nestorius, the Christian fighter, would defeat the giant champion of the pagans, Laos, like David defeated Goliath. I remembered how, when the pagans discovered that the prayer of Saint Demetrios helped defeat Laos, they killed him, and he became a martyr. Tonight is his night, the night between summer and winter. The choice is yours, mine if already taken." "No," shouted Elena. "Cut the crap, we shall all escape. We shall take you to the hospital, we shall escape this." She started to make plans out loud on how to leave. My heart felt something in the words of Dmitri, like some power was in him, like a little bit of the peace he had come to me as well. Earlier, when I fought outside, I never prayed a bit, but now I started to feel like doing it, just by looking at him. Nonetheless, I helped Elena, both in discussing tactics and in putting them in practice. We improvised some torches from pieces of wooden box, with cloth and vodka, to keep them away. We also improvised some Molotov cocktails from vodka bottles and cloth. Elena was very pushy about this, and I really admired her for that, as I admired Dmitri for his attitude. In a way, both of them were completing each other. "You know," said Dmitri, coughing, "I have heard about things like that years ago. It is not the first time this has happened. They came where people fight and kill each other. It makes them stronger. They are greedy in suffering and death. They are terribly powerful, but they are not by far undefeatable. I never heard anyone escaping something like what we go through now, but I trust the Lord that you have a chance. And in case you didn't escape, be ready to die. Ask for the Lord to forgive you for all your transgressions. Say your sins to each other. It is not like confessing them to a priest, but it matters. I shall start myself. Whatever I tell you now, tell a priest you trust. This is my final confession." And he started telling us his sins as we prepared. We could not stop him. What he told us then I shall not disclose, but I told to a priest after I escaped. Elena refused to confess in front of us, and that made me reluctant to do it either. Dmitri gave a sigh as all was ready. "Forgive each other. Love each other. Please forgive me for everything. Pray as much as you can. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Be prepared for both life and death. Death will seem certain, but it is not." By this time, he was already coughing bad. His face became bluish-gray. He could not walk on his own. I took him and helped walk on the stairs. Elena held both a torch and a gun. I held only a torch. She opened the hatch. A cold breeze that felt like it would have frozen my bones, if it weren't something else holding me, both me and Elena. The webs were all over the trees. The air was thick and difficult to breathe, like it intoxicating us with terror and hopelessness. One side of me realized all this, and the other side was tranquil. The result was like watching all this detached somehow. We used the compass to determine where south was, and the plan was to go south as much as possible. Path to exit the woods. We stepped out. No rain, only an autumn breeze. We felt them around, we felt the trees above us, but they did not move. I helped him walk a bit, then he signaled me I'd better let him walk on his own. I was reluctant to, but I complied. After a few meters, I realized he backed out a few steps. I turned to him. Elena turned as well. A spider the size of a large dog came out from the canopy and stabbed him in the back. But he was still standing. Elena opened her mouth in terror. I could not move. Dmitri spoke. I don't know how he was able to speak, since he was stabbed in the back. Christ is victorious already. You need to accept to be victorious in him. Go now. The Mother of God is with you. The Lord himself is with you. Go now, and always remember, Christ is victorious. And with that, he fell to the ground and the spider started devouring him. Something like an iron claw passed through my soul. Elena broke out crying. I don't know how, but something pushed me. I took the gun from her and grabbed her arm and started running towards the first clear path we could see. The air was really thick, hard to breathe, not like a city smog, but like something else. It was a clear night, not very cold, but I felt like I was in a frozen giant basement cage, surrounded by a crowd of predators that allow me to live for a few more seconds, not for my sake, but because they compete with each other to have me. The webs were all over the place. We could not just feel them almost all around, not just hear them, but also see them in the trees. We needed to run. If we stayed in one place, their mere presence would build up some sort of poisonous fear that would take over soon, the building up being unavoidable, even if they do not grab us. I lost track of sense and direction. I went into any clear passage between the trees. The torches kept them at bay for a little, only for a few moments. I knew that, if we stopped, they would gain courage and strength to take us. But it was enough. Elena cried muffledly. I felt her strength going down. Do not let go, sister, now. You remember how you saved me earlier? Now is my turn, I said. God is with us. We should rely on him now. There is no other way. The last phrase came out of my mouth half without realizing it. For a second of disbelief, I looked out into the front of us. On the path, there was a big spider, almost 2 meters long. I saw no immediate escape. Elena felt feeble, like she just wanted to kneel and give up. I shouted, Lord, protect us. Mother of God, cover us. Saint Demetrius, help us. I was quiet for a second, then said gently, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on us, the sinners. I fired the gun into the creature. I gave a horrible shriek, backed up. Elena stood up like something gave her a boost of energy, of life. We saw another clearing, and we ran towards there. We stumbled upon webs several times, only barely touching them. At one point, Elena got stuck with her shoulder in one web. It was nothing serious, but a spider the size of a dog came pretty fast. I managed to set the web on fire before breaking Elena free. The fire started to spread pretty fast. They feared fire, as even light from a flashlight was probably unpleasant for them. Less than 3 meters away, the darkness ate away the light. It was surely not a natural darkness. I could not stare at it too much, as it made me feel like I was sinking into something unreal. In a way, it was like quicksand for the mind. I almost stumbled several times. On the forest floor, we often stumbled upon human bones or piles of goo that had some leftovers like pieces of clothing, showing that they were part of a human body. We circled around several times because we found ourselves again in front of the flames. They were more widespread. It was clear they hated all the fire. Their shrieks turned into some type of screams that could easily break someone who is faint of heart. It was like they went into my very bones. The fire was our only hope. Elena was breathing heavily. It was clear that she could not resist too much. I stopped for a few seconds and looked into her eyes. She tried to be tough, but she was clearly pretty close to giving up. I said, Look, they are afraid of fire. I do not know if it is to exit from this, but at least we can take down as many as we can. We have several Molotov cocktails. I shall hang the gun on my shoulder and ask your help in getting them out of my haversack, and light them up to throw them into more places in the woods, to get as many of them down as possible. Do you think you can do it? Elena looked faint at me. I crossed myself, then I crossed her. Indeed, as Dmitri said, the Jesus prayer helps. At my signal, light them up and throw them. Please at least try. Elena smiled and tried to settle herself in the new arrangement, and we left just as a pretty big spider got close to us. We moved into an area that was far from the fire. I asked Elena to light up one of the bottles. It was really hard to do it while we walked, but she managed to. We soon had the chance, since there was a big one, in a tree, wanting to jump at us. I took the bottle and sent it into the spider. The tree got on fire fast, and we ran. Elena seemed into some new energy state, but it felt like it was something from outside. We repeated it several times. The fire took over different parts of the forest. The fear in my mind not just got stronger, but it started to blow like a wind. It felt huge anger from the creatures that turned into hatred. We prayed the Jesus prayer almost ceaselessly, just to keep us standing. Mentally, it was like running a marathon on a very narrow path, with the mountain slope on one point and a deep precipice on the other. We finished the bottles and I started firing the gun over and over as those things came more and more towards us and faster. At some point, we remained out of bullets. We were held by something or someone. No way we could have survived and not break. We could have lost it or died 100 times. At some point, Elena stumbled and fell to the ground. Her torch fell to the ground as she laid down, breathing heavily. I tried to wake her up. She was clearly at the end of her strength. She went to sleep on the leaves. At that moment, two things happened, one through the other. A dark shadow, greater than the darkness I was already accustomed with, covered us, and with thuds, giant articulated legs surrounded us, covering almost the entire clearing. It was good that Elena fell to sleep then, and she did not face the giant beast above us. I did not dare to look at it, as drops of unholy toxic saliva fell upon us. I heard the chattering of a giant mouth ready to chew us at once in such haste that it would not take its time to cover us into a cocoon and suck us. Even the invisible dark eyes felt like wanting to devour us, to suck us in a second before the mouth reached us. I do not know how the stench did not make me pass out at once. And the second thing was that, for a moment, I looked at one side of the clearing and I could see the field and the clear night sky. Mother of God, help us. Lord, have mercy on us. Perhaps my heart would have just stopped before the mouth ever touched me, when I heard a voice, perhaps in my mind, I do not know. The voice of Dmitri, who said, "Get up and place the torch into its mouth, then take the small knife from your boot and push it inside the enemy now." Perhaps my heart stopped beating. I do not know. I was already almost gone, but a terrible, yet amazing force took me up and made me push the torch inside my mouth. That force felt like a shield that protected us from death, or from having our minds blown by the scream, so that I was able to get the knife out of the boot and stab the being close to the mouth. The torch fell to the ground. The creature stood up in pain, and that invisible force made me, or helped me take Elena in my arms, rise and start running inside the tornado I was in. I do not know how I found myself out in the fields, running with Elena in my arms, sleeping. Unearthly screams were heard behind us from the woods, and I heard the creature coming towards us at an immense speed. I was like skydiving at a huge speed. I heard one last huge scream and a blast. I stopped and looked back. The being exploded out in the fields as the forest was on fire. I grabbed Elena and continued running. As we moved away from danger, my strength diminished. I let her down in the grass and tried to wake her up. She opened her eyes and gave a sigh. "It is over," I said. "The Lord saved us. He worked through Dmitri. Praise be the Lord." She started crying. I gave her a hug. If that last story didn't scare you, then hold on, because this one just might. My name is Jane. I'm in a friend group of 4 girls, including me. Recently, I made friends with this girl, Sarah, and introduced her to my other friends. I met her through my biology class. Mr. Williams sat her next to me, since she switched schools to our school mid-semester. I lent her my notes from the previous semester to catch her up on exam prep. Most of my friends were fine with her, but one of my friends, Maria, wasn't. I never bothered to ask why, since I usually talked to Sarah outside of the 4-girl friend group anyways. I did try not to bring her around Maria as much because I could always sense that Maria was uncomfortable around her. This worked for the most part until Sarah began joining us for lunch almost every day. I didn't specifically tell her to sit with us, she just started sitting at our table. Because of this, she started to get closer to another girl from my friend group, Jen, thus making Sarah talk more whenever she sat at our table. Maria really hated this and stayed silent the entire time. I started feeling bad and got curious, so I asked her about it during our only shared period, math. She told me there was no specific reason. It was just that Sarah gave her bad vibes. I was a little confused, but brushed it off for a while. I suppose it's not entirely abnormal to get bad vibes from a new person in your friend group. Anyways, last Tuesday, during biology, which was the last period, Sarah had returned all my notes and reviewers I had created back to me. I was shocked at how fast she picked up a semester's worth of lessons, but still thanked her and accepted it. When I got home, I started studying until I noticed an odd smell coming from my books. It smelled something like left-out fish, kind of like the leftover sushi a Japanese restaurant would throw into the trash. I asked her about it the next day, and she started getting emotional. She said that her family had been evicted the previous month, and they had been moving from place to place for shelter. On the days she studied my notes, her family was staying at a musty old motel and had been struggling a lot financially. I felt a surge of guilt flow through my veins for asking her about it. She walked away before I could apologize. During lunch, I talked to Jen about it, since she was also getting close to Sarah. She looked confused. Then, she explained that Sarah had just gifted her a Kate Spade bag a few days ago as an early birthday gift. How could her family be struggling if she could afford to gift Jen a Kate Spade bag? I was shocked. Why would she lie about that? Also, what was the cause of the smell of my books if her explanation wasn't true? I couldn't take notes during class because the smell kept distracting me. I just borrowed notes from Anna, the last girl from my friend group. I was too awkward and shy to bring the information to Sarah. I tried to forget about it, but I couldn't. The smell was so distinct, I couldn't forget it. That spoiled fish stench with an almost burnt smell? It was hard to explain. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided just to take a picture of my notes, then copy them onto a new notebook so I could throw the stinky books out after that. I wanted to tell Jen about it the next day, but she started ignoring me. She didn't even sit at the same table as me. Maria also sat at a different table from fear of Sarah sitting with us. Yeah, fear. I just ate lunch with Anna that day. She hadn't talked to Sarah much, other than small talk whenever she joined our table for lunch. Anna suggested that I text her when I get home. I did text her when I got home, but she didn't reply. She left me on read. Maria pulled me aside the next day. She finally explained why she had been avoiding Sarah. She had recognized Sarah from the summer camp she attended the previous year. She never really talked to Sarah there. She recognized Sarah because she had attempted to hit a girl on the head with a giant wood plank and was kicked out. She was sent to jail for about 4 months. That's why she had joined late this semester. Chills were sent down my spine. It all began to make sense, for a while at least. The next day, Maria was absent from class. I didn't know why. She wasn't replying to my texts or answering my calls either. I had lunch alone with Anna again, and she told me that Jen had given her a note that she said to give to me. I took it and read it after finishing lunch. The note read, "I'm being threatened." Another round of chills took over my body. Who was threatening her? Sarah? Like I had mentioned before, exams were coming up. Our final project before that was a model of a wind turbine. We were already 2 days behind schedule, so we agreed to meet up at her house, to my dismay. Wait, her house? I thought. Right before I left, I remembered how she got emotional a few days ago, speaking about how she was just evicted the month before, and how she had been moving from motel to motel for shelter. I hesitated going to her house, but I was already doing bad in chemistry, and I could afford to waste any more time for this project. I brought a small bottle of pepper spray with me, just to be safe. I arrived at her house at around 6 p.m. Not to offend anyone, but it did not look like the house of anyone who would be suffering financially. It wasn't a mansion or anything, but it had gray painted concrete walls, polished floors of wooden planks. Her parents weren't home. She explained that they had gone on a 2-month business trip. "It's fine. I'm independent. I can take care of myself," she explained. It was pretty comfortable, too. It made me even more uneasy. At some point during the project making, I told her I needed to use the bathroom. She told me to use the guest one, downstairs. On my way there, my nose started tingling, as if alerted or startled by something. It had caught the whiff of a very familiar scent, that burnt rotten fish smell. I looked behind me and realized it was coming from a small hallway. I entered the hallway slowly until I reached the door. The smell got stronger until it was almost unbearable. I still had that small bottle of pepper spray in my pocket. I was smarter than to leave it in my bag. I opened the door, my right thumb hooked onto my back pocket where the pepper spray was. There was a small staircase leading down into the basement of the house. It was dark. I couldn't see anything apart from the outline of a chair and a shelf. I felt the light switch right beside the bottom of the staircase. I turned the lights on. In the center of the room was Maria. She was unconscious, with a few scratches on her face, arms, and knees. Near the sides and corners of the room were about 4 dead and bloody birds, the corpse of a medium-sized deer. I gasped, stopping myself from screaming. I had been gone for about 3 minutes by then, and if Sarah had thought I was using the restroom, she would probably expect me to be back up soon. The stench was killing me, and I almost passed out. Maria's hands were tied to the back of the chair, and her face was covered with duct tape. I covered my nose and tried to untie her. Suddenly, it all went black. Not because I fainted, but because Sarah had found me in the basement and shut the lights. I had forgotten to close the door. I took out my pepper spray. "This is fun." "Not for you, though," I heard a voice cackle. The innocent demeanor and voice turned into a dark and murderous aura. A tiny light flashed behind me, leaving a shadow on the wall. I looked behind me, and it was Sarah. "Boo!" she screamed, as I jumped up in horror at the sight of her lit-up face from the flashlight under her chin. I fell backwards, bumping into the chair Maria was half-tied to. She woke up from the fall. I took out my pepper spray and sprayed Sarah in the face. She screamed in pain, blinded, as she bumped into the shelf, making it topple over onto her, while she landed on the carcass of the dead deer. I finished untying Maria and removed the tape on her face, and we hurried out of the house. I helped her as she limped out of the house, as Sarah's screams grew quieter and quieter the further we got from her house. We rode home on my tiny pink moped scooter. I called the police once we got home, as my mother treated Maria's wounds. Once the officers arrived at Sarah's house, she was nowhere to be found. What would have happened to Maria if I hadn't chosen to go to her house that day? Though this traumatic experience will follow me for a while, I'm glad I did it for Maria. The next day during lunchtime, the 4 of us finally gathered again, including Jen. She told us that Sarah threatened to kidnap her if she didn't get away from me, as Maria and I shared the terrifying experience at her house. Now, nothing could break the bond between my friends and I, not even some rando psycho killer. Every now and then I pass by the park to cool my ever-growing thoughts. I always pass by the same flyer near the lamppost beside the dumpsters. A missing persons report for Sarah Smith. Not wanted, missing. Why she did all of this, I don't know. I seem to have stopped her plans before she even finished it halfway, thankfully. I get curious sometimes, but I know it's better that I didn't find out. Feeling brave? Good. You'll need it for the horrors in the next story. My younger brother wanted to visit a haunted school for Halloween. He recently fell in love with ghost hunting YouTube channels, but wasn't ready to buy all the equipment to go on a hunt himself. But he wanted to still go to any haunted locations. I didn't exactly have the time to drive him around. I kept putting off hanging out with him until now. At first, the plan was to just drop him off at the school and pick him up later. Ben was 15 after all. The principal refused to let him explore the school alone, which I understood. I traded my shift and packed up my sibling for a boring day out. "Sorry, you're stuck with me for a few hours. Wouldn't you rather go to a Halloween party instead of hanging out with me?" I joked to him on the drive to the school. He didn't look as excited as I expected when he got into the car. Maybe he was a bit nervous. I wasn't invited to one, he said in an even voice, but I could tell he was upset. I shouldn't have brought up his lack of social life. He was a shy and nerdy kid. It's not as if he didn't have any friends. They just preferred to play games online rather than hang out together. Well, I bet they're all lame parties anyway. Who cares about drunk people dressed in skimpy costumes when you could explore a haunted school? I said, trying to lighten the mood. He smiled and I relaxed a little. Sorry, you gave up a shift for me, Ben commented, and the mood shifted again. I shook my head, not wanting to have this sort of conversation. I traded a shift, not gave it away. Don't worry about it. Money has been tight for us the past few years. We all made sure Ben got what he needed and some of what he wanted. I got a job early to help pay for things. He wasn't a dumb kid. He noticed the extra shifts and penny pinching. I think he felt guilty that he hadn't been able to find a side hustle that brought in money aside from mowing lawns in the summertime. We arrived at the school after nearly an hour of driving. The light of the afternoon was orange due to the season. I didn't know how long Benny wanted to stay here. An hour? 2? Until nighttime? The building didn't appear special. It was older. Ben told me it was built in the 60s. And it was still in use aside from some rooms being off limits. A man met us at the front doors inside. He was tall and thin with tied-back black hair. I didn't expect the principal to look like him. Instead of a balding, middle-aged, plump man, he was a handsome, slightly older man with hints of wrinkles at the corner of his eyes. Thank you for sharing your time and letting us explode tonight, I said to the man and shook his hand. Ben awkwardly did the same, nodding and acting nervous around a stranger. Normally, he wasn't this shy. This is Ben. He was the one who asked permission, right, mister? I trailed off, not remembering his name. Chambers. The principal was helpfully added. I don't mind giving up my Halloween to help a young man with a report. It's not often students are interested in the history of this building, he explained. Report? I glanced at my brother and he looked away. So that's why he was acting weird. He lied to be able to hang around this building tonight. It was a harmless white lie. But I decided to make my brother actually do a report and send it to Mr. Chambers as a thank you for his time. A gust of wind rattled the front doors. I looked over my shoulder to see the sky suddenly gray. I didn't remember seeing dark clouds when we walked inside. A small rumble came under our feet. It wasn't as loud as thunder, but what else would it be? No one else seemed to notice. Mr. Chambers gestured for us to start walking down the hallway as he started to go into details of the school. I only half paid attention. I had graduated high school a year ago. Since then, I worked my butt off to save up for college. I was accepted into a course and would start next fall. Being inside a high school felt odd. I never expected to be back in one. We stopped in front of a long line of lockers, but oddly enough, a door had been removed from one. The metal was dusty from years of neglect. In 1971, 6 students and a staff member went missing. There had been rumors they found the head of one student inside this locker. However, there are no official reports detailing such events. The idea remained causing any student to be assigned the locker to be tormented by their classmates. We removed the door years ago to avoid such bullying. Mr. Chambers said in a calm voice. He was a good speaker. His tone was even and easy to follow. I hadn't looked into any history of the place beforehand. All I knew was the it might be haunted thing. I stood behind Ben and placed a hand on his shoulder, causing him to slightly flinch. I liked teasing him and didn't get to do it very often now. Ben wrote a few things down and took a photo of the locker with his phone. Sorry, I don't know much about this place. Were the students ever found? I asked the principal as we walked down the hallway to the next location. Not all of them, he answered with a slight shrug. So, they found at least one of them alive, or... I said, following behind Ben and the man. Oh no, I meant they found some parts of them. Mr. Chambers corrected himself. Normally I wasn't affected by ghost stories, but the casual way he spoke about such a gruesome crime made my skin crawl. It bothered Ben as well. Reaching down, I grabbed his sides and made a noise at the same time to make him jump. His face flushed red as his leg kicked out, trying to get me. Mr. Chambers smiled, the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes making him appear older for a moment. We finally stopped in front of a locked classroom. A sign had been taped to the door, warning people to stay out. Our guide stepped next to the door, ready to dump more information before unlocking it. All photos and reports of the event have been destroyed or lost. All we have left are second-hand accounts of the people who witnessed the gruesome sight that was found on Halloween night in 1972. Mr. Chambers started. Wasn't it 1971? I spoke up, unable to help myself. Ben glanced at me. The principal didn't appear offended, but was glad to see I had been paying attention. Yes, the 7 people went missing in 1971. Their bodies only appeared a year later. Pieces of the 6 students were found inside this classroom, arranged in a way people described to be a part of a ritual. All the heads were missing. They all appeared healthy before their deaths, as if they were taken care of over the year they went missing. Since there are no photos and sparse eyewitness accounts, no official details of the ritual-like crime are available. Benny appeared interested. He was so engrossed in the story, I bet he would jump out of his skin if I grabbed him again. I held off, crossing my arms. This all felt like a weak story to me. Did the ritual thing even happen? Or do you think stories got exaggerated over time? I suggested, only to have Ben kick my shin. Mr. Chambers softly laughed at us and nodded his head. That's entirely possible. He agreed, which disappointed my little brother. There are simply not enough facts in this case. What is known for certain is the 7 people disappeared. 6 students were found inside this classroom a year later with pieces missing. The staff member was never found. Due to the lack of information, countless rumors spread. A few stuck. Most claimed the staff member killed the students in some sort of satanic ritual. The police handling the case was a small, inexperienced department and never solved the case. That added to the rumors. It was a long time ago. They didn't have computers and all that back then, so I don't blame them for losing records. I heard there had never been a murder in this area, let alone 6. I think I read one of the students was a deputy's niece. He killed himself years later because he could never find her murdered. Ben said, showing off just how much he researched this crime. I wish he put the same kind of effort into his math homework. Mr. Chambers was nodding along, but he looked a little concerned over something. Was 1971 really that long ago? He asked, mostly to himself. He didn't look to be in his 50s until I squinted a little. I bet he was having the same kind of crisis I did whenever I heard kids speaking in newer slang. I understood the feeling of suddenly being aware of your graying hair. Anyway, you'll be able to take photos for your report. I just ask you to not enter the room. Mr. Chambers said, then reached over to unlock the classroom door. For some reason, I felt my heart start beating faster. I unconsciously held my breath, almost expecting to see the still dead bodies of the students trapped inside. It was a silly idea, and yet, the mental image didn't leave. A burst of cold, dry air came from the room when the door was opened. Just before Mr. Chambers let go of the handle, a sound echoed down the hallway, causing all of us to jump. A phone rang loud and angry. The older man chuckled over his reaction and told us he needed to answer the phone or call the person back. We assured him we would be fine alone for a few minutes and let him rush down the hallway. Ben raised his phone and carefully started to take photos of the dark classroom. He needed to put his flash on to see inside. The room was empty, with the floor warping from years of disuse. The windows had been covered with cardboard. Small cracks of dull gray light came through. Even the blackboard had been removed. "Why are you so interested in this?" I asked my brother. Somehow, my voice sounded wrong. It was as if we shouldn't speak next to a place like this. I dunno, He started, unsure if he wanted to tell me. I placed my hands on his shoulders, tempted to hug him. He was getting older, so signs of affection like that didn't fly anymore. No matter how old he got, I knew I would always see him as my baby brother. I wondered if he would grow taller than me. Right now, I was a head taller than him. I like the idea of people's memories sticking around. We don't know what happened to these people, but we know their names. They're a little sign honoring them and everything. I think it'll be there for years. I had no idea he cared about stuff like that. Was he having a middle-age crisis before he outgrew his baby face? What made his brain worry about these things? That's sweet you remember their names, I commented, and he jabbed an elbow into my gut. Don't call it sweet, he said, annoyed. I smiled, unable to help myself. This poor kid was concerned about so many things, some of which didn't matter. Why? Because it's not all alpha male? I teased. Stop, he said with his cheeks getting red. In case you didn't notice, we don't come from a very manly bloodline. A light burst of wind could topple all the guys in our family. Embrace being cute and delicate. It's in our blood. I bent down to hug him from behind and tried to rub my cheek against his. I think the last time I smothered him like this, he was 10. He yelled, trying to get out of my grasp. We wrestled for a few minutes, little Benny unable to gain much distance. His foot slipped inside the classroom. He jolted back with such a horrified expression on his face. I thought something was wrong. I let go, concerned over his reaction. Ben's breathing started to get heavy, with tears appearing in his eyes. I was confused by the sudden change. Hey, buddy, did you roll your ankle or something? I asked, wondering if I had been too rough. No. He stuttered, then took a moment to collect himself. I just felt wrong. I can't explain it. I patted his shoulder. This place must be getting to him. How about we leave early? Maybe your blood sugar is messed up or something, I offered. He chewed on his lip, not really wanting to take me up on my offer. Footsteps came from down the hallway. Mr. Chambers came back, unaware of how Ben was feeling. What are you kids up to? He asked in a friendly tone. He must have heard our roughhousing from down the hall. Sound carried well in this place. Mr. Chambers, I asked, my voice suddenly filled with dread. Are we the only ones in this building? He nodded, confused. Yes, why? He asked, staring in our direction, not understanding our change in expression. Then who is behind you? He had stopped walking down the hallway when he first spoke. I had noticed a dark shape I assumed to be his shadow until it stood up. My hand flew to Benny's, griping it tight, my body getting ready to run. The shadow looked to be a very tall and thin person, lacking any features. Then a smile appeared on its face just as Mr. Chambers turned to look at it. Instead of appearing afraid, he looked almost disappointed seeing such a creature. It was as if he thought we were childishly pranking him. A clawed hand shot out, digging into his stomach. Within seconds, the hand ripping out all sorts of important flesh and organs, spilling them onto the ground. The older man didn't scream or make a sound. His body fell limp into the creature, to helplessly be further ripped apart. We were too scared to scream. We just ran. Our shoes hit the floor hard, slipping in places. The shadows followed us. The lockers flew open as countless dark hands shot out, trying to rip at us. Benny tripped. On instinct, I scooped him up to keep running, thanking God we did in fact come from a family with the men on the shorter side, making him easy to carry. I saw the front doors and turned to crash into it. My brother was in my arms as I used my back to open the glass doors, heart racing. We should have gotten out. Instead, I found us walking back into the school. Did I get turned around somehow in my panic? I set Ben down and dragged him along to go through the doors again, only to walk back into the school. I screamed in frustration. How was this possible? Okay, so we did see a shadow monster. The front doors magically not letting us outside were no longer out of the realms of possibility. Windows, Ben shouted. He took my hand to drag me into a classroom. The far wall was nothing but a line of windows. When we entered the room, desks and chairs started to move, trying to get in our way. We jumped over them, reaching the other side to bang on the glass. I had picked up a chair to smash the window, just as Benny unlocked on and opened it. That worked. I pushed him through first. To my horror, he came tumbling back out through a suddenly open window next to me. I swore a few times, using words my little brother had never heard me say before. The activity in the room was getting too chaotic. We got out before getting crushed by some desks. For the moment, the hallway was clear of the shadow hands, giving us a second to regroup. We can't get out, Ben said in a shaking voice. They totally did a ritual in 1972, I said, and he furiously nodded, agreeing. I played this game with a haunted school where you needed to collect the body parts of the students. Maybe we need to do that? Make them whole and we can leave? He suggested, on the verge of a breakdown. Buddy, that's a game though. The words just slipped out. He made a squawking noise and then spread out his arms, gesturing at the situation we were in. Okay, sure, game logic could make sense. We were dealing with shadow monsters and possessed school equipment. I wish I could say we had a plan. We avoided the shadows and tracked down the body parts to please the restless spirits. I really wish this had a happy ending. Instead, I suddenly felt a white-hot pain in my back, and then the feeling in my legs was cut off. Looking down, I saw my father splattered with blood. I was scared to death that he had somehow gotten hurt until I glanced at my stomach to see 3 long dark claws coming out from in. Benny started to wail. The claws were ripped sideways, and my body fell to the ground in pieces. I can't even start to describe the pain. I was scared of death, but my last thought before the darkness took over was how I regretted bringing Ben here. I woke up. I should not have woken up. My body jolted, fear and panic clouding my brain. I found myself bound to a chair in the middle of an empty classroom. The boarded-up windows told me what room we were sitting in. Benny was next to me, also tied to a chair, passed out. Thankfully, I didn't see any wounds on him. Slowly, his head raised. Our eyes met, and he started to scream. He nearly tipped over his chair trying to get away from him. I had been ripped apart in front of his eyes. I don't blame him for the reaction. When you were 6, you left the fridge open all night at Christmas because you wanted Santa to get more food for all the reindeer and bring some back for the elves. I told Mom and Dad the fridge just died overnight, so you didn't get in trouble. I said, trying to sound calm. He stopped struggling, eyes wide, trying to decide if he could trust me. Ben assumed I was some sort of monster disguised as his dead sibling instead of the person he cared about coming back to life. You? He sputtered, holding back more tears. Go ahead and cry, I told him. I wanted to just hold him and cry too. He quietly sobbed for a few minutes, rubbing his wet cheeks against his shoulders. My heart hurt that he was going through all this. But I was glad he trusted me enough to act more like a kid when we were alone. I felt like when he was with our parents, Benny acted too mature. He needed to just relax once in a while and not worry about what others thought. I'm sorry if I didn't, he started. Don't. I cut him off with a stern voice. This is not your fault. Don't ever blame yourself. Footsteps came from the door as it was opened. A person walked over in front of us. Someone Ben didn't expect to see walking around, but I did. I glared at him with clear hatred. He's right. It's not your fault. I didn't even know this was going to happen until it did. Mr. Chambers said, his voice sounding cold and distant. Bullshit. Bullshit, I shouted back. He didn't react. A cold feeling came to the back of my neck. I glanced behind us to see the tall, dark figure, its shape flickering. My stomach rolled, making it hard to keep a brave face. A ritual was performed by the school principal back in 1971. The goal was to bring forth dark creatures into this world. Instead, this new layer was created. No one can come in or out unless the layer lets them. No one can die. The ones trapped in here shall forever remain stuck in time, regardless of how much suffering they endure. It seems as if the seal on this place weakened enough to let you two inside. It's happened before, but all the others were able to escape before the seal closed. Bad luck for you two. The older man shrugged, sounding like he was simply telling us the weather and not how we were doomed. Ben's bottom lip started to tremble. This was far too much for him to handle. I strained against the rope, trying to get free of the chair. I couldn't accept this. There has to be a way out, I shouted, voice raw. Mr. Chambers shook his head, then paused. It was poor acting. He had been waiting to make this offer since he walked into the room. The seal is weak enough to let one of you leave. The one that remains here will be tormented without any rest or escape. This place is fueled by negative emotions. The more intense, the better. It appears as if I've gotten used to it all. Thus, why it opened up to bring another victim inside. I narrowed my eyes, trying to spot a lie. Mr. Chambers did appear dead inside. He sounded nothing like the person we first met. Benny made a sound, snapping me from my thoughts. I'll stay, I shouted before my brother could speak. No, he yelled back, sounding like a child. I was the one who asked to come here. I'm staying. That's final. I used my best older sibling's voice to shut him up. He lowered his head, failing to hold back more tears. It hurt so much seeing him like this. I don't think there could be any physical pain these monsters could inflict that would ever be greater than how I felt at that moment. I don't want you to leave. I barely have any friends. I just wanted us to hang out before you left for college. I can't. My heart sank deeper into my chest. I wasn't aware he had been that stressed out about me moving away next year. Mr. Chambers watched us with a cold and emotionless expression. He didn't care which one of us stayed, as long as he had a new plaything. Benny, listen to me. I love you. No matter where I am or how much time passes, that will never change. You're a great person. You just need to see that. I know you'll make friends. You don't need that many. You'll find a person who will see how special you are. I'm a baby. He sniffled. So what? Be immature. Keep playing the games you like and collect awesome toys. You can be 40 and still have the same interests you did when you were a teenager. Just keep being you. You're a good, kind person. That's all that matters. He raised his head and I put on my best smile. I wanted to see him grow up. I wanted to watch him get friends and get taller than me. I wanted to hear about his weird interests and cover for him when he got in trouble with my parents. From what I'm hearing, you both would like to stay. I need a clear answer from each of you. The older man said in a stern tone. I nodded at my brother, knowing that he'll be all right without me, no matter how painful of a thought that was. I'm staying, I firmly stated. I'm leaving, Benny said, holding back sobs. Mr. Chambers raised his hand and snapped his fingers. That was it. Benny disappeared, as well as the chair I had been sitting on. I fell to the floor, free, but still stuck inside the school. I'll give you a few hours to collect yourself. Then we'll start, he said, and started to turn away. I want the truth. What's really going on here? I demanded. Something felt off about his words. I couldn't place it. I knew he had been lying, but about what? He crossed his arms behind his back with a sigh. When he spoke again, he sounded like he had when we first met. My twin was the one who performed the ritual. He wanted an army of monsters under his control because he felt like the world owed him more than what he had. Of course, he botched it all up, leaving me to clean up his mess. I made a deal that would seal away what he summoned in this lair as long as those monsters were fed negative emotions. These creatures cannot be sent back. If this seal breaks and this layer disappears, they'll come into the world to attack innocent victims. He explained, and my head started to swim with questions. Why didn't you tell us that? How come you let Benny go without the truth? I asked, somewhat doubting his words. Maybe he was lying to get me on his side for some unknown reason. The shadow monster watched us in the corner of the room. The sharp claws at its side were ready to use when the time came. After a minute, he finally looked over with a tired expression. There are some sad people in this world. I didn't want this to get out in case they started to come here offering themselves. They may assume since they're already in pain, then they might as well make their suffering mean something. A heavy silence fell between us. I didn't know what to believe. Was this man a victim or the mastermind behind all of this? It looked like I now had a lot of time to try and figure it out. I'm getting out of here. I don't care what you say. I need to get back to my brother. Mr. Chambers looked me over, almost amused at my statement. A sudden thought came to me. Was he here by choice? Or did his bother to force him to stay all those years ago? And what happened to his twin? As if able to read my thoughts, to speak again. If I had a better relationship with my brother, then all of this may not have happened. Instead, we both got dragged into the trouble he caused. While you're here, feel free to fight back and insult him all you want. He earned it. A cold breath appeared at the base of my neck. A pair of dark clawed fingers wrapped around my shoulders from behind. A deep, cold dread came to my stomach that made it impossible to turn around and face what was just out of sight. The man who wanted power became twisted into something beyond human, and he had been hurting the only one who ever cared about him for years. The hands fell away, letting me breathe again. Mr. Chambers left the room after giving my cell phone an interested glance. I guessed he hadn't seen them too often and wasn't certain of what they could do. The signal was weak. No calls got through. It took a few solid minutes to just load anything. Even if I could contact someone, how can they reach me? Those things are waiting just outside the room. I can hear them. I don't know how much longer I have before they drag me outside to do God knows what. No matter how scared I am or whatever I face, I can't give up. I'll see my brother again someday. I don't care what I have to go through to make that happen. If you think the worst is behind us, you're in for a surprise. The next story is lurking. I just wanted to have a nice vacation getaway after fall midterms. Instead, I'm crammed into a hot, tiny space, barely able to breathe, trying not to pass out while typing this. For reference, this all started when the girls' trip we talked about in the group chat finally became a reality. You see, my friends Callie, Genevieve, and I, Eleanor, Ellie for short, are hardcore Halloween fans. Anything horror-related, spooky, paranormal, you name it, we eat that shit up. Fall is our favorite time of year. So, as a reward for our hard academic work this semester and passing exams, the three of us saved up and pitched in for a trip to New Orleans, Louisiana, the most haunted city in the United States of America. The best part? Our trip would take place the week of Halloween. Exciting, right? Wrong. It should have been, but it didn't turn out that way. For me, at least. I don't know where my friends are or what they're doing. All I can do is hope that they're not stuck in the same sick and twisted game as me. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me explain. Last night, the second night of our trip, some local told us about the Seekers game. Our Airbnb was in the French Quarter, which is home to Bourbon Street, where the party never ends. We'd been bar hopping and partying all night dressed as the Powerpuff Girls. Callie was Blossom, Jen was Buttercup, and I was Bubbles. It was pretty late in the night when we stumbled into this bar. It was mostly empty, with just the three of us, the bartender and the local, occupying the space. After our first round of shots, Jen started lamenting about how she wanted to see something really spooky. We'd been on a couple ghost tours already, but nothing was really hitting the spot, you know? Callie and I agreed, clinking our shot glasses together before ordering another round of drinks. That's when the local stepped in. "So you want to see something scary, eh?" A Creole accented voice asked ominously from a booth in the corner. The three of us gave each other the look. Before bursting out into a fit of giggles, we went back to drinking, brushing the man's interruption off. Then he got up from his booth and started making his way towards us at the bar, a whiskey sour in hand. The local was an older, skinny black guy. He walked with a bamboo cane to help with his limp. One of his eyes was blind, a cataract causing his retina to look pale blue and clouded. A salty goatee cascaded down his chin in the shape of a V. "You should play the Seeker's game, then." He slammed his glass on the bar, causing the three of us to jump in fright. This garnered a little chuckle out of him as he took his seat on a bar stool. "The Seeker's game?" I asked, shakily, taking a sip of my drink. He definitely grabbed our attention now. "What's that?" The local grinned with a glimmer of mischief in his good eye. "Oh ho ho, mon chéri, do you really want to know? Because once you do, there's no going back." "Callie, Genevieve," and I looked at each other skeptically. Callie then answered his question with another question. "Would we be asking you if we didn't?" "Huh." He drunkenly laughed, energetically banging the palm of his hand on the counter. "You three are fun. I like it." We responded with more nervous laughter. At that point, he was starting to creep us out more than this game was supposed to. The local then threw his head back, gulping down his drink. "To play the Seeker's game, you first have to call out to him. The Seeker will then extend an invitation out to you if he wishes to accept. The game begins when the invitation is received. Be warned though, for he sets the perimeters. He picks the time. The only thing you have to do is hide." "How do we call out to him?" Callie asked, chuckling under her breath. Clearly, she didn't believe a word he said. Jen finished what was in her glass, looking lame. The local over curiously. She tried and failed to conceal her intrigue. "Do we just say his name?" "No, mon chéri," the local innocently grinned. "A chant must be invoked so the Seeker can hear you. It goes, 'Seeker, Seeker, heed our call.' With every breath we hide and sprawl. 'Seeker, Seeker, heed our call.' As shadows dance, let fate enthrall." He leapt off his seat, swaying his shoulders back and forth with his arms up in the air. He laughed a wicked laugh before saying, "Then you must gather around, holding hands, and shout to the heavens. We want to play the Seeker's game. We want to play the Seeker's game. We want to play the Seeker's game." When the local was done with his display, he took a bow before getting back in his seat. Jen gave the man a weak pity applause. Okay, Callie said, taking another shot. Needless to say, we were thoroughly freaked out, but another round of drinks would fix that. So, Shat's the prize if we win. Do we get a wish or something? The local stiffened, giving her a serious look. The prize? The prize is your life. No fucking way, I murmured into my shot glass. Jen and Callie gave each other the look again. They followed in my footsteps and consumed more alcohol. Like I said, once the game starts, there's no going back, he said, shrugging his shoulders. Well, thanks for telling us about this scary game of yours, I said, pulling out my wallet to pay. Genevieve and Callie followed, apparently on the same wavelength as me. Consider us spooked. The local tipped his imaginary hat at us. Do have a happy Halloween now, he said, flashing a smile before hobbling back over to his booth. We gave the man our final pleasantries before leaving the bar for the night. So should we do it? Callie asked randomly as we walked down Bourbon Street. By then, some time had passed since our encounter with the local. It was nearing almost 4 a.m. Do what? I responded, fiddling with my costume. Play the Seeker's game, duh! Out of the three of us, Callie was the last person I expected to bring up playing the game. Jen pulled out some chapstick from her purse and started applying it on her lips. Sure, seems fun. Am I the only one that remembers him saying we could die? I laughed, tightening my pigtails. Police! Callie squealed. It's not real, Eleanor, so there's no harm in trying it. I couldn't argue with that logic. After looking around for a place with the perfect ambience, we landed on an old courtyard. A defunct fountain sat in the middle with vines covering it and some marble benches. The moonlight gave it an ethereal glow. We set our things down and started to chant. Seeker, seeker, heed our call. With every breath we hide and sprawl. Seeker, seeker, heed our call. As shadows dance, let fate enthrall. Next we gathered in a circle and grabbed hands, mimicking the local as we gyrated back and forth. We danced and spun around, having a little and had fun with it. Our raucous laughs filled the old courtyard. We want to play the Seeker's game. We want to play the Seeker's game. We want to play the Seeker's game. The three of us stood there waiting in silence for something to happen. After standing there for 5 minutes, Jen and Callie snorted and started giggling like schoolgirls. Nothing had happened. But I felt weird. Too creeped out and too drunk. I voiced my thoughts to the group. My friends wanted to stay out a little longer, so I went back to the Airbnb early by myself. I bid the girls adieu and somehow managed to stumble back and right into bed. Today, I woke up with a raging hangover around 3 in the afternoon. My first stop in the bathroom revealed I looked as bad as I felt. The hair in my pigtails were wiry, my makeup was running, and there was a stain of unknown origins on my blue dress. My second stop was to the kitchen. There I brewed myself a fresh cup of coffee and downed about 4 aspirin. Groggily, I stumbled to the front door, wanting nothing more than to enjoy my morning cup of joe in one of the rocking chairs out on the porch. I wanted to take in the historic scenery and watch as people got ready to start trick-or-treating. A warm gulp of coffee slid down my throat as I stuck my hand out for the door handle. A swipe and a miss. I paused, the lip of my mug stopping just beneath my mouth, wisps of steam still floating off the hot beverage. The doorknob was gone. A deep breath, then a step back. I must have been more out of it than I thought. After rubbing my eyes, I looked again. Still no door handle. In its place was a patch of smooth wood painted white. Like there had never been a doorknob there at all. I let out a disbelieving laugh. I'd try the glass sliding back doors next. The coffee mug just about slipped out of my hands. The plastic handle on the doors had been removed too. Frantically, I searched every door in the house. This is when I discovered pretty much every other door still had its handle. Only the doors leading to the outside world seemed to be inopenable. Okay, if I couldn't leave through a door, I'd just have to crawl out a window. Imagine my surprise when I found that the windows we'd been able to open just the other day were now one big pane of glass, unable to open. No biggie. Glass could be broken. Honestly, I was bugging, completely freaked out and feeling like a caged rabid animal. And caged rabid animals do crazy things when they're scared. The dining room table of our Airbnb had these fancy wicker chairs surrounding it. They were light, but sturdy too. Just sturdy enough to break through a glass pane. A guttural yell passed through my lips as I charged at the back door. A wicker chair as my battering ram. Thunk. My shoulder crashed into the piece of furniture, aiding my attack on the glass. Unfortunately, my first attempt was fruitless. Composing myself, I picked the chair up and charged forward once more. The view of freedom taunted me. Just beyond those glass doors lay a whole world filled with fresh air. I set forth my attack, running with all my might. The collision was a hard one, but not enough to break the glass. My balance wavered from all that momentum. I tripped, tossing the chair back with me. Thankfully, I managed to catch myself on the kitchen counter before cracking my head open on the floor. That's when I saw it. The note. It was addressed to me, Ellie. The handwriting on it was hauntingly light and elegant. It was an invitation. My heart sank to the bottom of my stomach. No way, I breathed out, shakily. It can't be. But it was. The back of the note revealed the rules of this game. This house. He sets the perimeters. The game lasts until midnight. He picks the time. The game starts now. All you have to do is hide. Fuck me. According to the note, he would begin seeking at sundown. That gave me about an hour and a half to find a good hiding spot, which wouldn't be easy in this Airbnb. The layout was small. Only a master bedroom, a guest room, living dining room, and kitchen. Plus furniture was sparse too. Hiding under the bed, in a closet, or in the shower would be too easy. The seeker would find me too fast. The cabinets were a no-go too. They were filled with food or other miscellaneous items. I needed to think outside the box. I searched the bedrooms for a crawlspace entrance or attic door, just to see if maybe there was a secret hidden entrance somewhere. I pulled a couple books out from the bookcase. Nada. Maybe the couch? No, it would look lumpy and obvious if I hid in there. With a groan, I kicked the thing, letting all my frustrations out, because at that point, I was going to die. My purse slipped off the cushion from the harsh vibrations, falling to floor and spilling its contents out everywhere, including my set of car keys. My eyes lit up as I remembered my car was out in the garage. Normally it'd be parked out on the street, but something in my gut told me to bring it in last night. Now, I had the perfect hiding place. You see, my mom wanted us to drive her old minivan down here. She went on and on about luggage space, good gas mileage, and reliability. Basically, she didn't give me much choice about taking it. But the good thing about this minivan is that there's built-in compartments in the middle. The middle seats can fold down into them, giving the cabin more trunk space if needed. When the middle seats were up, however, theoretically, there was just enough space in those compartments to fit a tiny, petite body like mine. Knowing I'd be in there a while, I grabbed a large water bottle and my phone before heading out to the garage. To double-check and make sure, I tried to open both the regular door and garage door once I got out there. Just as I thought, though, they wouldn't budge. The minivan chirped as I unlocked it. Stealing one last glance out of the garage door window before hopping in, I noticed sundown just off in the distance. It wouldn't be long before the seeker started seeking. Squeezing myself into the compartment was harder than I thought. The angle needed to be just right for me to fit down there. Relief flooded through my body as I finally got my hip into a good place where it wouldn't pop. I slid the door to the car closed, grabbing the compartment hatch and floor mat at the same time. Slowly, I lowered the upper half of my body down into the small space, carefully sliding everything above me in place. From an aerial view, it should appear like a normal minivan from the inside, with nobody none the wiser that I was hiding right beneath the seats. It's dark out now. I know because there's a hole on the floor that's about the size of a penny. I can see the garage's concrete floor. Someone's been moving around inside the Airbnb. It's probably the seeker. I can hear him searching, angrily tossing things about because he hasn't found me yet. I've been holding my breath since the light in the garage turned on a couple minutes ago. Slow, methodical footsteps filled the air as the seeker walks around, still looking for his target. Me. I can see his shadow moving about from my little peephole. My tongue almost came off, stifling a scream when the back door to the minivan slid open. I mentally kicked myself for not locking it behind me. My hands were clasped tightly around my nose and mouth, making my breathing barely audible. I watched his shadow in anticipation as he rifled around in the cabin above me. My shuddering sigh of relief was concealed by the sound of the car door slamming shut. The seeker stormed out of the garage in a fit of anger. He's back inside my Airbnb, still seeking. I've outsmarted him for now, but there's still 4 more hours until midnight. All I can do is pray to God that he doesn't find me. I don't think I'll survive if he does. Thought that last one was haunting? This next story will have you looking over your shoulder. I found them this morning, stuffed between the torn seats of my old leather duffel bag, a brittle stack of my own journal entries from 30 years ago. Strange, considering I barely remember writing them, let alone journaling at all. I hardly remember anything from my early years, busy from driving coast to coast nonstop to build a decent bank account. Look how that turned out. It's my handwriting, no doubt. There it is, clear as day, looping and fierce across every line. The entries start like any trucker's log, full of routes and road conditions, little observations as we're taught to do at truck driving school. But as I read, the tone shifts and my handwriting gets shaky and approximate. Then I remember. The night of Halloween 1994. October 24th, 1994. There's something strange about Nevada this time of year. It's the way the desert wind has a bite to it, how it carries the smell of sagebrush and dust, how the sky turns from deep orange to bruised purple and makes the whole landscape look haunted. I'm due to drive across the state in the next few weeks. Got to Tonopah early, barely had time to grab a coffee. We're all meeting up at this truck stop off the 6, and it's a grimy place, but it has this campfire pit where we gather when the sun sets. Jerry said it was great at this of the year, like a rite of passage, he said. They're all in their 40s, 50s, old-timers with the road written into their faces. I'm the youngest by a few decades. Probably why most of the ones I don't know look at me like I shouldn't be there every time I go to one of these gatherings. Usually the others ignore me, which is fine by me. October 27th, 1994. One guy I didn't recognize, never seen him around before. Not new in and of itself, however, that one guy, just standing there at the edge of the firelight, silent as stone. Didn't say much, barely even looked up. None of the other guys seemed to be put off, but all ignored him unless spoken to. As always, I was more of a distraction. I probably shouldn't go to these anymore. Jerry hasn't even shown up. Just awkward. October 30th, 1994. They've gone from accidents to hauntings to outright superstitions, all of them drunk. Incredibly, that makes them like me more. We're huddled around the fire, about 20 of us. Multiple conversations. Swapping stories. One of the guys, Tom I believe, even asked me where I'm headed next. That's when I heard it. Low and quiet, almost like a whisper. There's always the shortcut. The stranger stands a bit apart from us, arms crossed, eyes like coal. What? I said, turning around. You said you had to be in Denver by tomorrow. That's quite the ride. So I said, there's always the shortcut. Puzzled, I looked around at Tom, the guys. Not one met my eyes. I turned back towards the stranger, but he was gone. All that was and is left is his voice, deep and succinct. There's always the shortcut. No one has looked at me since then, like the stranger's words had made me invisible. Better get to bed. Couldn't sleep. That man, he was waiting for me by my rig. I almost turned back, but he looked so desperate, his eyes wild and dark, and I felt something twist in my gut. Listen to me, he said, voice low, barely more than a breath. Whatever you do, don't take the shortcut. If you see it, just don't take it. He swallowed, glanced over his shoulder, and I swear, he looked as if he was running from something. Please, just don't. I tried to ask him what he meant, but he was already moving away, slipping into the shadows. I stood there, cold and confused, a bad taste in my mouth. Then I got back in the truck, shut the door and locked it tight. I lay there, mind spinning, but sleep pulled me under, for a few hours at least. Better get back to it, the road is long to Denver. October 31st, 1994, I woke up late. Later than I'd planned, anyway. There was no time for coffee, no time to think. I just threw my gear together and hit the road, the world around me hazy, like a half-remembered dream. The sky was still heavy with the last of the dawn haze as I pulled onto the empty road. It stretched out ahead of me, cutting through the flat Nevada desert like a scar. I couldn't shake the stranger's words from my mind, circling over and over. If you see it, Something about that warning itched under my skin. The others, they just went silent, like kids who'd been told a ghost story they half believed. This is a well-known route, pretty common, and not once had anyone mentioned a shortcut. So why that weird moment? Miles stretched on. The landscape was desolate, just sagebrush and scrub rolling on either side of the road, with the occasional rocky outcrop breaking up the monotony. By then, I'd made up for my late start. By noon, I'd hit that perfect rhythm where the hum of the engine melted into the background, and time began to slip. This was what I loved about the road, the way it let you disconnect. Even the strangest warnings and wildest stories could fade out here, where it was just you, the truck, and the endless blacktop. Then, sometime around late afternoon, something caught my eye. Up ahead, a thin track branched off from the main road, barely visible, like it was half buried under sand and years of disuse. My heart skipped. I knew the roads out here like the back of my hand, and I'd never noticed this turnoff before. The shortcut. My hands tightened on the wheel, and I slowed down, the gravel crunching under the tires as I approached the odd branch in the road. I could feel a strange pull, like something deep in my chest was telling me to turn, to see where that road went. But then the stranger's words echoed again, and past I went. The shortcut quickly vanished in the rearview mirror and set my mind racing. Was that it? Skip the shortcut, if it even exists. I don't know how long I sat there, engine idling in a trance. Didn't even remember stopping the truck. Hours have gone by. I'd better shift back into drive and merge onto the main road. Can't believe I lost all this time. The rest of the drive was quiet, almost too quiet. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky with fire and shadows, I felt that unease creep back in. The road seemed to stretch on forever. No other cars, no signs of life. Just me, my rig, and the empty desert. I finally stopped for the night about an hour ago, at a rest area miles near the Colorado border. As I killed the engine, I noticed something strange in the back of my mind. A foggy sort of sensation, like I'd left something behind on that road in Nevada. Something I couldn't quite remember? November 1994. The first thing I remember is waking up with a start, like I'd been shaken out of a nightmare. But when I tried to recall any details, they slipped away, just shadows in the dark. I checked my log, saw the miles I'd covered, and my own scrawled handwriting in the entry from the night before. Skip the shortcut. If it even exists. I don't remember writing that. October 30th, 2024. 30 years. And tomorrow, I'll be back on that same stretch of road, going east from Tonopah to Denver. I wonder if they still hold those gatherings, with the campfire. The roads are different too. More highways, more mapped out, so probably not. And yet, I'm holding these old, brittle pages, reading my own handwriting like it belongs to a stranger. It's strange how certain memories stay sharp while others slip through your fingers. I still don't remember everything from that night, that trip. I don't remember much at all, but that thin strip of road branching off over and over like it's always there, like a déjà vu. These pages, they're proof. Proof that something happened, something I can't, for the life of me, remember. Why did I stop? None of the later journals refer or even allude to that night in 1994. I must admit, the thought stroked me a few times since I got assigned that same route, on that night, 30 years later. Sharp as a knife. What if the shortcut is still there? The world's changed in 30 years. We're connected now, everything documented, recorded, tracked. Tomorrow I'll have cameras, a dash cam, and GPS. If the shortcut shows up again, if it even exists, I'll see it, and I'll have proof. I'm not sure what I expect to find. Maybe just an overgrown trail leading to nowhere, or a memory that I can finally lay to rest. But there's a part of me that feels it, that deep, quiet pull. The same feeling I had all those years ago, sitting behind the wheel, staring down that thin, sandy track. I'll take the route east tomorrow, and if the shortcut's there, I'll record every mile, every minute. The sun's setting outside now, casting long shadows across my wall, and I feel that strange, familiar itch under my skin. The same one that whispered to me 30 years ago. This time, I'll take the shortcut. Don't let your guard down just yet. The next story will push your fear to the limit. When my wife Sarah died of pancreatic cancer, everything changed in ways I couldn't even begin to imagine. I could no longer afford the house we bought together on my income alone, so I had to sell the property at a loss and relocate to an older, smaller home on the edge of town. The weeks blurred into months as grieving members of her family came by to collect belongings left behind in the will. Friends stopped by to offer a shoulder to cry on and help move me into the new home. Having a job that allowed me to work from home used to feel like an incredible perk. Without Sarah around and little to no reason or motivation to leave the new home I found myself living in, that perk began to feel more suffocating. At first, I dismissed the subtle shadows moving around in the peripheral of my vision as just a side effect of my grief-stricken mind. I'd oftentimes hear odd noises emanating from somewhere in the house, but I'd ignore it, thinking it was just a byproduct of how old the place must have been. One night I asked an old high school buddy of mine, Donnie, to help move in some old furniture with his truck. Even without offering to pay for the gas, he seemed happy to help and offer his condolences. After his decade-old pickup made the trip down that old dirt road for the last time, I invited him inside for a drink. We were at the table, catching up on old times, when he offered up a suggestion. "You know, Mike, this new place of yours is kinda creepy. I think it could use a remodeling." I let my gaze sweep around the kitchen before offering up any response. Faded floral wallpaper and warped wooden floorboards reinforced his point. "Yeah, I'll probably get around to it eventually." "Hey, if you ever need me, man," Donnie said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I'm here for you, buddy." A weak smile was the best I could muster. We talked about old friends and new hobbies, and for a moment I almost forgot Sarah was gone. But Donnie needed to go home eventually, and once again I found myself alone in a home I couldn't seem to feel familiar with. Well beyond midnight, I sulked in the living room and gazed out at a full moon that brought a subtle glow to the backyard. An overgrowth of tall grass and weeds choked the ground outside, reminding me of yet another chore I'd need to address. It was during this thought I caught a faint shimmer of my own reflection in the window, and the shadow of a person standing behind where I sat on the couch. I spun around, heart nearly exploding into my throat, only to see the empty kitchen illuminated by faint moonlight. Glancing back at the window, the shadowy image I saw was gone. Realizing I must have been way too tired and overwhelmed, I headed off to a nightmare-filled sleep that only lasted a few hours. After 6 full months had given Sarah's passing all it needed to fully sink in, I slipped into a daily routine. I'd wake up at the crack of dawn, get my work done just in time for lunch, and spend the rest of my day outside of the house. Not just because my friends recommended hobbies and doing literally anything to keep my mind off of the grief, but because there was just something about being alone in that house. I couldn't stay outside forever, of course, and eventually I'd have to come home and put in earplugs to drown out the creaks, scratches, and occasional soft whispers that would randomly resonate from within the walls. Donnie even laughed when I told him I'd gotten into the habit of sleeping with the lights on because I was tired of shadows moving around in places they shouldn't. Things took a sudden turn for the worse when we began remodeling. Donnie showed up one night with his truck full of paint, tools, and other stuff, and we got to work doing what he suggested just half a year prior. "What the hell?" Donnie exclaimed, nearly making me bump my head on the pipes underneath the sink as I crouched down to clean the rust. "What?" I asked, turning to see the color drain slightly from his face. "Something just moved in the hallway over there, Mike." He pointed down the dim passage that connected the kitchen and living room to the 2 bedrooms. I didn't see anything there, but after experiencing the creeps for months on end, I didn't have any reason not to believe him. "Was it a shadowy figure?" "Yeah, how'd you know?" I sighed and took off the rubber gloves that were soaked with rust-removing chemicals. "I've been seeing stuff like that since I moved in. Thought it was just my mind processing everything, but I guess not." "Mike, do you believe in paranormal stuff? Because whatever I saw seriously just gave me the creeps." I pondered the question for a moment. In another life, I would have told Donnie I was a hard skeptic, that facts and logic could explain away anything. Man, after the last 6 months, I don't know what's possible. After Donnie left that night, I decided to do some research about the house online. Couldn't find much, other than the fact it was foreclosed in the 70s because the owner couldn't make payments on the mortgage. There was one curious detail, however. Online, it was listed as a 3-bedroom house, yet I only had 2. In the following weeks, activity ramped up as Donnie and I got more work done on the house. The day we replaced the old floorboards in the kitchen, a mug somehow fell out of a closed cabinet and shattered on the countertops. Random splotches of blood appeared on the bathroom walls, and Donnie denied any involvement of it being there. The worst experience had to be the night we replaced the busted window in the guest bedroom, because we both heard loud and heavy footsteps coming from the kitchen. When we went to investigate, hundreds of dead flies were sprawled across the floor, even though I've never had a fly problem. Man, I can't do this anymore, Mike. This is freaking me out. That was all Donnie had to say about the flies that night before grabbing his things and stepping out for the last time. I decided that night to list the house for sale with a realtor online. Unfortunately, because this house was an old fixer-upper that sat far away from town on a lonely dirt road, I'd never see anyone interested in buying, not even after lowering the price several times. One day, I looked into acquiring the old floor plan for the house to figure out the layout for some plumbing issues. That's when I noticed the diagram showed a third room that didn't seem to exist. This room, according to the floor plan, would sit between the guest bedroom and the kitchen, connected by a third door in the hallway where Donnie saw that shadowy figure one night. Sure enough, I took a tape measure and calculated the square footage for the guest bedroom and the length of the hallway and discovered there was more than enough space to accommodate another room. I called up Donnie to try and convince him to check it out with me, but he remained firm on never stepping foot into my haunted house ever again. Resigning to the fact I'd have to rent some of my own tools for the job, I began tearing down the wall that would hide this supposed third bedroom. Picking the centralmost spot on the hallway, I slammed a sledgehammer into the drywall and found success with a fist-sized hole. Crouching down, I peeked into the hole, only to find pitch black on the other side. After smacking the wall a few more times to make the hole bigger, I retrieved a flashlight and directed it into the darkness. Ice rushed into my veins when I saw what lay beyond in a mostly empty room. Hanging on the wall and reflecting the beam of my flashlight was an ornate mirror with gold trim, appearing like a relic from the past. It wasn't the mirror that caused my blood to freeze over, however. It was the human skull that sat directly underneath it on the floor. It took the police all night to investigate that room and search the property for any additional remains, but that skull was all they could find. They tore a doorway-sized hole in the wall during their investigation, leaving that mirror on full display whenever walking down the hallway. I put the mirror up for sale online, but I didn't have any more luck selling that old antique than I did the creepy house it was found in. Every night since opening that hidden room, I'd swear there would be a figure in the mirror every time I walked down the hallway to get to my bedroom. One night when I got up to use the bathroom, I caught a glimpse of an emaciated, bony arm protruding out of the hole in the wall leading to that room, only to be gone when I did a double take. That's when I had enough of that damn mirror. I took it down and put it in the closet where I wouldn't need to look at it anymore. When I awoke the next morning and saw that mirror hanging back on the wall, I knew I had to get the hell out of that house. This wasn't grief or faulty memory or even a carbon monoxide problem. Something was deeply wrong with the house I had purchased, and I couldn't stand being there anymore. I was an hour into packing my bags for a long extended trip to go somewhere, anywhere else, when I heard a soft cry coming from the hallway. If it didn't sound like her, I would have given that hallway and by extension that mirror the bird. Sarah? The crying stopped, but I knew it was her voice. There couldn't be any mistaking it, that was her voice. My heart beat 1,000,000 times in the few moments it took to slowly walk over to the opening in the hallway. Standing there at the precipice of a room that had not existed until just a few days ago, I found my gaze drawn to the mirror. That's when her face began to materialize. Her red hair, freckled face, and arresting green eyes. A deep longing tugged at my heart and sank it into sorrowful depths as I blinked and the apparition of my wife vanished from the mirror. I stood in a deeply uncomfortable silence for what must have been 10 full minutes before the smoke alarm snapped me back to reality. Rushing out of the hallway, my jaw dropped at a wall of fire that erupted out of the decades-old stove and began consuming the walls and cabinets around it. The gravity of the situation didn't dawn on me until I had grabbed what little belongings I could and escaped from the smoke that rapidly began filling the home. According to the firefighters, the blaze was caused by some fault in the gas lines that combusted when an old wire somehow came into contact with the gas line. Yet, when I looked at the roaring flame that consumed that old house, and I swore I saw a twisted face materialize in the heat and ash, I wasn't so sure. It's been a few years since that all happened, and I live in a new house in the city now. A cozy one-bedroom, one-bathroom flat that accommodates everything I'd ever need. Part of me is still grieving, of course. What brings me to tell this story is the fact I got a package in the mail yesterday, marked with no return address. When I opened the package and saw the color draining from my face in a mirror that should have been melted years ago, I knew right then and there I shouldn't have tampered with that old house. If you're still watching, be warned. The next story takes terror to a whole new level. Many years ago, a group of paranormal researchers and their local guide searched for a fellow scientist who, along with his students, disappeared with no trace. They came to Craven Moss Manor, a strange blight of a structure perched on the edge of an English cliff, like a vulture looking for a new corpse to feed on. I was one of the fools who thought they knew what was really happening at that accursed place. A dense fog had rolled in from the ocean, suffocating the cliffside where Craven Moss Manor stood. The unholy mist clung to the ground, refusing to lift, even as the sun reached its highest point. The locals, long wary of the manor's sinister reputation, began to witness strange phenomena. Lights flickered in the fog, unnatural shadows moved where none should exist, and the most unsettling of all, the rhythmic thumping, like the beating of a colossal, invisible heart, echoed through the night air. Whispers of these occurrences eventually reached the university, where I and my other compatriots taught paranormal and supernatural quasi-science popular in those days. Alarmed by our friends' prolonged absence, the college board worried about their investment and sent a small search party to the manor, hoping to uncover the fate of the missing professor and his companions. The group, consisting of 3 fellow professors and a local guide, traveled to that malevolent house. I, the senior researcher at the time, set out with my friends toward the manor with a growing sense of unease. As we ascended the cliffside road, the fog seemed to thicken with each step, muting all sounds except the crunch of gravel beneath our boots and the ever-growing thump, thump, thump. The guide, a grizzled man hardened by years of living near the cliffside village, wiped a sheen of sweat from his weathered brow. His hand trembled, though he tried to hide it. "We should turn back," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper, as though the surrounding air would punish him for speaking too loudly. "This place? It's wrong. Always has been. There's something here that ain't meant for us." His words hung in the thick air, stirring something deep inside each of us, a primal fear that no amount of logic or science could dispel. We exchanged glances, the growing sense that perhaps we too were about to disappear without a trace gnawing at the edges of our minds. I hesitated, glancing up at the manor that loomed ahead, barely visible through the fog. Its twisted, decaying structure seemed to pulse in the mist, as though it had a life of its own, waiting, watching. The rhythmic thumping echoed louder now, almost as if the manor itself had a heartbeat. "We have to press on," I said, though my voice lacked the certainty I had hoped for. "We have a duty to find out what happened to our colleague, and to the others." But even as I spoke, I could feel the weight of the fog closing in, suffocating any semblance of rationality. The manor was alive in its own horrible way, and it was waiting for us to step inside. Dr. Maria Hartman glanced at her colleague, Dr. Thomas Wallace. They shared a look, a silent debate of reason against terror. Finally, Dr. Hartman straightened her shoulders. "We're here for answers. Our friend and his students could still be inside." The guide's eyes widened, his pupils dilated with fear. He hesitated before nodding, though every bone in his body screamed to run. As we neared the manor, it loomed out of the fog, twisted and more decrepit than any of the photographs had shown. Cracked stone walls were covered in sickly moss, and windows of dark voids reflected nothingness. The front door stood slightly ajar, creaking like an open mouth ready to swallow us whole. Wallace's fingers twitched around his flashlight. "We need to find out what happened. We owe them that much." The guide swallowed hard, his voice barely a rasp. "If we go in there, we might not come back." We stepped inside, the door groaning shut behind us. As the heavy sound echoed through the decaying halls, the temperature dropped and the stench of rot hit us like a wall. Cold, damp air weighed on our lungs. "Well, that isn't ominous or nothing," I joked, trying to lighten the mood. "I do not feel this is a jovial occasion, Dr. Edgiel," Dr. Wallace complained, clearly upset by the atmosphere of the house. The rhythmic thumping grew louder. Each pulse reverberated through the walls, rattling the decayed fixtures. The house was alive, and its pulse matched that of the entity lurking within. The lower floors were eerily silent, filled only with the ruins of forgotten lives, dust-covered furniture, faded portraits, and books disintegrating into ash at the touch. It wasn't until we reached the second hallway that the nightmare truly began. Strange symbols, pulsating with a faint, sickly light, adorned the walls. The closer we got to the symbols, the louder the thumping became, vibrating the very air. Dr. Wallace ran his fingers over the grooves in one of the symbols. These aren't decorations, they're warnings." "Or a ward," Dr. Hartman whispered, her eyes scanning the markings. "Something's trapped here. I dare say the only thing trapped here is bad cleaning." I poked at the symbols and my hand came away glowing. "See, it is just some sort of glowing moss causing these carvings to glow." We moved cautiously to the library, where a faint greenish glow seeped through the cracks of the door. Hartman pushed it open slowly. Inside, we found chaos. Shelves had collapsed, their contents reduced to heaps of dust. The table in the center was split clean in half, symbols etched into it now glowing with an unnatural light. The strange symbols on the walls glowed faintly, and the familiar rhythmic thumping resonated with an unnatural pulse, growing louder as if something were awakening beneath the floor. We scanned the room with mounting dread. The floorboards groaned underfoot, sagging as if alive. A creeping chill seemed to rise from the ground itself. "Do you feel that?" Hartman whispered, her breath shallow. "It's like the house is breathing." Wallace nodded, sweat beading on his forehead. "We need to leave. This place isn't just cursed, it's hungry." "You are just overwrought by the strangeness of this place," I said, rubbing my face free of sweat even amid the cool air. Wallace knelt and picked up what looked like a journal. Reading it, his brow furrowed more than I had ever seen it. His eyes widened and he looked back at us. "What is it, man? You look like you just read the love notes of Satan himself." I asked, fearful of the answer. "It is our friend's journal. We need to get out of here now." He made for the door as fast as I had ever seen him move. Suddenly, the floor split open in jagged cracks, black tendrils of shadows spilling from the gaps like inky blood. The house began to twist around us, warping, bending its architecture into grotesque shapes. The once familiar walls transformed into slick, sinewy material, more akin to flesh than stone. Then came a deep, guttural laugh that reverberated through the very bones of the house. It was no longer just the rhythmic thumping, it was something else. Something far worse. "The house, it's alive!" The guide screamed, backing toward the library door, only to find it sealed shut behind him. With no escape, the shadows from the cracks writhed like serpents, slithering up the walls, wrapping themselves around the rafters. They had a terrible sentience to them, like they were seeking something, someone. The guide froze, his voice trembling. "It's after us. It's been waiting for us." Before anyone could move, the tendrils shot forward and grabbed him by the ankles. His scream echoed off the warped walls as they dragged him toward the center of the room, where the floor seemed to open up like a yawning mouth. His body twisted unnaturally, bones breaking, skin stretching as the house consumed him, pulling him down into the black maw. We watched in horror, our legs paralyzed by fear. Hartman could barely speak. We have to go." Sickened by the sight of the man's death, I stood still, almost giving the creature, the house, time to make me into a snack. A tendril snaked out and stabbed at the place my foot had been a second earlier. Holy shit, run you idiots, or we are next. I yelled as I ran like my life depended on it, which in hindsight it did. Upstairs, maybe if we get above the mist, the thing will have no control. The air on the first floor grew thick with the stench of death. The house groaned again, its guttural laughter more distinct now, almost mocking us. We sprinted toward the hallway, but the walls were shifting, closing in. The once familiar path now spiraled and contorted, leading our desperate group deeper into the house's labyrinthine interior. Behind us, the sickening sound of bones cracking and flesh tearing reached us as the house devoured its prey. "Don't stop," Wallace gasped, pulling Hartman along. "It's trying to trap us." The warped walls cracked open and gave us an exit from this all-of-us-could-be-eaten buffet. I grabbed both of my friends and pushed them toward the last opening. We bolted from the library, the green fog of the void chasing like a nipping dog after our retreating feet, devouring the floor, walls, and ceiling as we ran. The house shifted and contorted around our party, walls elongating and twisting like the intestines of some hellish beast. The air grew thick with the stench of blood, and the rhythmic thumping was now accompanied by guttural whispers, speaking in a language older than time itself. Finally, we reached the main hall. Just as we sighed with relief, having thought we had found a way out, the entrance was sealed shut. Stone lay where the doorway used to be, as though the house itself refused to let our dwindling group escape. The thumping was now unbearably loud, shaking the very foundation of the manor. Every corner we turned led us deeper into the nightmare. Doors disappeared and windows melted into the walls. We're trapped," Hartman panted, tears streaking her face. "There's no way out." Wallace's eyes darted around frantically. "No, there has to be." Up, I screamed, pointing at the stairs we had just come upon. I bounded up the stairs 2 at a time, thankful I had kept my body as sharp as my mind. Maria Hartman was about 30, and she was a sometimes companion of mine. Presently, we were taking what she called a break, but I still had feelings for her, and I'll be damned if I was going to lose her to some nightmare house. I turned, grabbed her, and pushed her up the stairs. Wallace stayed close behind us, not wanting to be the one to get eaten next. The house groaned again, this time louder, as though savoring its victory. And then, from deep within its walls came the sound of that laughter. A dark, resonant voice, speaking words that none of us learned professors could understand. The ancient entity was alive, free, and it had no intention of letting us leave. As the shadows crept toward us, we heard a deep, resonant voice from the void, speaking in a tongue that burned our ears and attempted to shred our minds. The entity whispered its dark will, its words clawing at our sanity. Hartman closed her eyes, the horror too great to bear. Wallace clenched his fists, his mind unraveling under the weight of the ancient, malevolent presence. As the shadows enveloped us, a final, chilling whisper from the house issued a promise that echoed through the void. "You are home." In a last-ditch effort to save us, I grabbed both and pulled them to a window. Hartman opened her eyes, looked out, and looked back at me, just as a tendril snatched at Wallace. My friend of many years was hurled through the air and pulled into a hungry maw waiting for all of us. Maria screamed as he was eaten, and I grabbed her, and we jumped. 50 feet, give or take a few inches. The water below would be very cold, even near freezing. But our chances were better in that jump than staying in the house. The house above trembled as if our escape broke it. The void the entity was fighting to escape swallowed the last remnants of light, and as the thumping grew deafening, it consumed itself and the house. I kept Maria in a tight squeeze and kept us plummeting feet first. We hit the water hard. I managed to get us to the surface, and then nothing but darkness as I passed out. Sometime later, I awoke in a cot on a fishing boat, Maria sitting there watching me intently. "I always knew you had a streak of crazy in you," she said, smiling, "but I never thought it would be what saved us. I am just as surprised as you that it worked." I jumped up, realizing we were still in danger. What of the house? What happened to it? The fisherman said there was a blackness that glowed, and then the house was gone. The cliff is now empty. Maria said, looking sad as she mourned our friend. "He saved us even if it wasn't deliberate. His sacrifice gave us the time to jump and live another day." I hugged her close, as much to help her as to help me. "What was that thing?" she asked as she looked into my eyes. I contemplated the question, unsure how to answer. The last message our colleague sent us was that the observatory was being used to communicate across dimensions. I sat down as sudden weakness racked my body. They must have woken something up that was able to cross over into our world, even if partially. My vision blurred and the boat pitched. "Matthew, what was that?" Maria asked, fright lacing her voice. "I guess a wave." I rubbed my eyes, trying to see clearly again. Slowly, my eyes cleared as a tentacle lashed out and pulled Maria into the depths. "Maria!" I screamed. I ran to the railing in time to see the creature wink out of existence with Maria in its jaws. In one last, almost defiant gesture, the monster had pulled open the gate between us and snatched Maria and the fisherman back to its hellish dimension. My mind was nearly destroyed by the loss of my love and the events of the day. I went to the cabin and piloted to shore, so I could tell the world of what we went through and what was coming. That beast opened the gate without human sacrifice or help. There is no reason to believe it will not do so again. So, if you see an article about a haunted house, do not go to investigate. It might just be a hoax. Or it could be that creature hungry again for our flesh.